The Montana wind carried the scent of coming snow as Luke Mallory drove the shovel into frozen earth. Each strike echoed across the barren landscape like gunfire, a sound he had sworn never to cause again. The pine box beside him held what remained of his world. "We need to finish before the storm hits," said Caleb Reed, his weathered face creased with concern. At 60, the former cavalryman had seen enough death to recognize its patterns. "She deserves better than this, Captain." "Don't call me that," Luke muttered, digging deeper. "That man died at Gettysburg." Caleb said nothing, just kept digging. The hole gradually took shape, 6 feet of rejection against Montana's claim on Mary Mallory's body. The first flakes began to fall as they lowered the coffin. Luke's hands trembled, not from the palm, but from the weight of everything the simple pine box contained. He knelt beside it, snow melting against his feverish skin. "I should say something," he whispered. "God already knows what's in your heart, son." Luke nodded, then reached inside his coat. The Colt Navy revolver companion through 3 years of war gleamed dully in the fading light. He placed it atop the coffin. "I won't need this anymore," he said. "Where we're going, there are no more battles to fight." Caleb grabbed his arm. "A man without a gun in this territory is just waiting to be buried himself." Luke pulled away. "Cover her up. I want to get back to the baby." As dirt struck wood, Luke turned his face into the strengthening gale. The sound behind him might have been shovel against earth, or it might have been his heart cracking open. Montana would claim them all eventually. Today it had merely taken its first payment. Dr. Emmett Lang folded his stethoscope with precise movements. 20 years of frontier medicine had taught him that a doctor's confidence was often the only medicine that worked. But not today. Not for this. "She's weak, Luke. Too small for this world." The infant girl lay swaddled in Mary's quilt, her face a miniature of her mother's. Born 2 weeks early, she barely filled Luke's 2 hands. "But she'll live." Luke's voice was raw from a night spent shouting into the storm for help that came too late. Lang avoided his gaze. "Without a mother? Montana winters are hard on the strongest of us." The doctor's silence completed the thought more effectively than words. Luke stared down at the tiny creature that had cost him everything. Her eyes, still the cloudy blue of newborns, seemed to search his face for something he couldn't provide. "What's her name?" Lang asked. "She doesn't have one." The doctor frowned. "A child needs a name, Luke. Mary should have named her." The words came out harder than intended. "Mary should be here." Lang gathered his instruments. "You need help. A wet nurse at minimum." "There's no one in Silver Creek." "Then write to Helena. There are agencies that arrange such things." Lang placed a hand on Luke's shoulder. "I've seen men survive worse, but not alone. Not with an infant." After the doctor left, Luke sat in the rocking chair Mary had brought all the way from Pennsylvania. The baby's breathing was shallow, irregular. Outside, the blizzard howled like something hungry. Caleb entered, stamping snow from his boots. "Storm's getting worse. You should both be near the fire." Luke didn't move. "She has Mary's nose." "That she does." Caleb approached cautiously as though the grief around Luke might be catching. "What will you call her?" "Nothing. She won't be here long enough to need a name." Caleb's face hardened. "That's the war talking, not you." "The war never stops talking, old man." Luke finally looked up. "I've written to Helena about a nurse. Until then, we'll manage. And if the nurse doesn't come in time..." Luke's silence was answer enough. 3 days passed in a blur of sleepless nights and the baby's weakening cries. Luke moved mechanically through each task, warming milk, cleaning, rocking while feeling nothing. The numbness was preferable to the alternative. He was changing her when the knock came. 3 sharp raps that cut through the howling wind. Caleb reached for his shotgun. "Expecting anyone?" Luke shook his head, wrapping the baby and placing her in the wooden crate that served as a crib. He crossed to the door, every nerve suddenly alert. The man on his porch wore a black coat dusted with snow, his beard neatly trimmed beneath calculating eyes. Behind him, 2 others sat on horseback, hands resting too casually near holstered weapons. "Mr. Mallory." The man's smile never reached his eyes. "Judge Samuel Harmon, I wanted to offer my condolences personally." Luke didn't move from the doorway. Judge Harmon's reputation preceded him. Silver Creek's de facto ruler, Northern Pacific Railroad's man in Montana territory. "Thank you, we're managing." Harmon peered past him. "I understand you have a child now, without a mother. A difficult situation." "As I said, we're managing." Of course, Harmon nodded sympathetically. I only mention it because the territory has certain responsibilities to ensure the welfare of its youngest citizens. The threat thinly veiled hung between them. The baby has everything she needs, Luke said. I'm sure. Harmon glanced at the men behind him. I also wanted to discuss your property. In light of recent developments, you might consider whether this remote location is still suitable. It's my land. For now. Harmon's smile tightened. The railroad is coming, Mr. Mallory. Progress waits for no man or woman. Luke's hand instinctively reached for a sidearm that wasn't there. My wife is barely cold in the ground. Precisely why you should consider your options while they remain options. Harmon tipped his hat. We'll speak again soon. My deepest sympathies for your loss. The men turned their horses, disappearing into the swirling snow. Caleb closed the door. That wasn't about condolences. No, Luke agreed. It was about the silver. 3 months earlier, Luke had discovered a vein of silver ore while digging a new well. Nothing spectacular, but enough to supplement the ranch's income. He'd told only Mary and Caleb. How would Harmon know? Caleb wondered. Someone's been on our property. Luke moved to the window, studying the vanishing hoofprints. They're not just after the railroad right-of-way anymore. The baby's cry interrupted his thoughts, weaker than yesterday. Each sound like a clock winding down. I need to get that letter to Helena tomorrow, Luke said, before the past closes completely. Caleb nodded. I'll ride at first light. That night, Luke wrote by lamplight, the baby fitfully sleeping nearby. To whom it may concern, I am in need of immediate assistance. My wife died in childbirth 3 days ago, leaving an infant daughter. I require a wet nurse or suitable caretaker. Payment is not an issue. Please send someone as soon as possible. Respectfully, Luke Mallory. He sealed the envelope, then added a postscript. The child will not survive another week without help. 2 weeks later, Luke stood at the corral mending a broken rail. The cold had settled into his bones like it meant to stay forever. The baby was inside with Caleb, growing weaker by the day, despite their best efforts with goat's milk and sugar water. The approaching horse caught his attention, a chestnut mare, picking its way carefully through the snow. The rider was slender, bundled against the cold, a woman by the shape. Luke set down his hammer, suddenly conscious of his unkempt appearance. He hadn't shaved since Mary died. The woman dismounted gracefully, revealing a face framed by auburn hair beneath a practical hat. She was younger than he expected, perhaps early 30s, with intelligent eyes that assessed him quickly. Mr. Luke Mallory, her voice carried clear across the yard. That's me. Clara Bellwright, she approached, extending a gloved hand. From Helena. Luke's heart leapt. The agency sent you. Something flickered across her face. Not exactly. May I come inside? It's been a long ride. Luke led her to the house, watching as she removed her gloves and coat. She wore a simple traveling dress, practical but well-made. Not what he expected from a wet nurse. Clara's eyes widened at the state of the cabin, unwashed dishes, piled high clothes strewn about, the pervasive smell of neglect. But her expression changed entirely when she saw the baby in Caleb's arms. Oh my, she whispered, crossing the room. May I? Caleb surrendered the infant with visible relief. Clara cradled the tiny form with practiced ease, her fingers gently checking the baby's forehead. She's feverish and severely underweight. Clara looked up sharply. What have you been feeding her? Goat's milk mostly. Some sugar water. Luke felt suddenly defensive. Dr. Lang said it was all we could do. Clara shook her head. She needs more. A proper formula with more fat. She studied the baby's face. What's her name? The silence stretched uncomfortably. She doesn't have one, Caleb finally answered. Clara's expression remained neutral, but her eyes hardened slightly. I see. And when did your wife pass, Mr. Mallory? 2 weeks ago. Luke found himself unable to meet her gaze. Childbed fever, the doctor said. Clara nodded, still rocking the baby. I'll need clean water boiled and fresh cloths. Do you have honey? Luke moved automatically to fulfill her requests. Only when she had settled by the fire with the baby did he ask the question burning in his mind. You're not from the nursing agency, are you? Clara looked up, her expression direct. No, Mr. Mallory, I'm not. I'm a journalist with the Montana Post. I'm investigating Judge Harmon and the Northern Pacific's land acquisition practices. Luke stared, uncomprehending. Then why are you here? Because your letter arrived the same day I was researching suspicious deaths around Silver Creek. She continued tending the baby as she spoke. 5 ranchers have disappeared or died under unusual circumstances in the past year, but all had land the railroad wanted. And you thought Mary might be connected? Luke's voice rose. She died giving birth. I don't know yet, Claire answered calmly, but I do know this child needs help, and you clearly can't provide it alone. Caleb cleared his throat. The lady has a point, Luke. Luke ran a hand through his hair in frustration. So what exactly are you proposing, Miss Bellwright? A trade. I'll stay and help with the baby while investigating Harmon. You provide shelter and information about the local situation. She met his gaze steadily. Unless you'd prefer I leave you both to your current arrangements. The baby whimpered softly in her arms, the first sound she'd made in hours. How do I know you can care for her? Luke demanded. I raised my younger siblings after our mother died, Clara answered. I know more than most about keeping babies alive in difficult circumstances. Luke looked at Caleb, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Fine, Luke said finally, but understand this, I'm not looking for a wife, just someone to keep her alive until I can find a permanent arrangement. Clara's smile was cool. Believe me, Mr. Mallory matrimony is the furthest thing from my mind, she said. By evening, the transformation was remarkable. Clara had bathed the baby, prepared a richer formula with condensed milk and egg yolk, and cleaned the worst of the kitchen. She moved with efficient purpose as though the cabin were an assignment to be conquered. Luke watched from the doorway as she sat by the fire feeding his daughter, with a patience he couldn't fathom. The baby seemed stronger, already taking the bottle with newfound determination. You have questions, Clara said without looking up. Ask them. Luke entered the room fully. What exactly are you investigating? Northern Pacific is buying up land for the transcontinental road. Those who sell quickly get fair prices. Those who resist. She finally looked up. Accidents happen. Illness strikes. Suddenly widows are more amenable to selling. You think Harmon is behind it? I know he is, I just can't prove it yet. She adjusted the baby's position. He was here, wasn't he? After your wife died. Luke nodded, offering condolences and suggesting I might want to sell. And do you want to sell? This land is all I have left to give her. Luke nodded toward the baby. Mary loved this valley. Clara studied him. You found silver, that's why they're pressing so hard. Luke's surprise must have shown on his face. I do my research, Mr. Mallory. A small vein from what I understand, but enough to make your property particularly valuable. How did you? Mining office records are public. I checked before riding out here. She smiled slightly. I'm good at my job. The baby finished her bottle and Clara expertly raised her to her shoulder, patting gently until a small burp escaped. There we are, she murmured. That's a good girl. Luke felt something crack inside him, the first breach in the wall he had built around his emotions. He turned away before Clara could see his face. I'll check the livestock, he said roughly. Caleb will show you where you can sleep. Outside, the cold air stung his eyes. Or perhaps it was something else that made them water. The snow had stopped, leaving a pristine blanket across the valley. In the distance, the mountains stood dark against the star-filled sky. Mary had loved nights like this. The sound of approaching horses jerked him from his reverie. 3 riders moving fast through the moonlit snow. Luke ducked behind the woodpile, cursing his missing sidearm. The lead rider dismounted near the barn, followed by the others. In the moonlight, Luke recognized one of the men who had accompanied Harmon earlier. They carried lanterns and what looked like surveying equipment. Make it quick, the leader said. The old man wants measurements of the South Ridge by morning. Luke's hand closed around the axe handle he'd left by the woodpile. 3 against 1, poor odds, especially unarmed. But this was his land, his home. Before he could move, a shotgun blast shattered the night. The men froze, turning toward the porch where Caleb stood, weapon leveled. This is private property, the old soldiers called. Next one won't be a warning. The men hesitated, hands hovering near their guns. We're on official business for Judge Harmon, the leader shouted back. Unless that business includes dying tonight, I suggest you conduct it elsewhere. Caleb chambered another round, the sound carrying clearly through the still air. For a tense moment, Luke thought the men would draw. Then the leader signaled retreat. They mounted quickly, disappearing back toward town. Luke approached the porch. That won't be the end of it. No, Caleb agreed grimly. That was just the scouting party. From inside came the soft sound of Clara singing a lullaby. The gentle melody seemed impossibly fragile against the vast, cold night and what Luke now recognized as inevitable conflict. I need to get my gun back, he said quietly. Caleb nodded. Before it's too late. The following morning, Luke stood before Mary's grave. The simple wooden cross marked a promise broken. He'd sworn to protect her, to give her the life she deserved. Instead, he'd brought her to this wilderness to die. He knelt in the snow, his fingers tracing the fresh-turned earth until they found the edge of the pine box. Digging was easier this time, the soil still loose from the recent burial. When his hand struck wood, he paused, suddenly uncertain. "Forgive me," he whispered. The coffin lid opened with a protesting creak. Mary's body lay shrouded in her wedding dress, already beginning the inevitable transition from woman to memory. The Colt Navy rested atop her folded hands, its blued steel incongruous against the pale fabric. Luke removed it gently, checking the cylinder by instinct. Still loaded, 5 chambers full. "I thought I was done with killing," he told her, "but they won't leave us be." As he replaced the lid and refilled the grave, each shovelful felt like a betrayal. Not just of Mary, but of the man he'd tried to become after the war. When he returned to the cabin, Clara was waiting on the porch, the baby asleep in her arms. "You did what you had to do," she said, nodding towards the revolver now strapped to his hip. "How did you know?" "I've interviewed enough soldiers to recognize when a man reclaims his weapon." Her expression was unreadable. "Just be certain you're ready to use it." Inside, she'd worked more miracles. The cabin was transformed floors, swept dishes, cleaned a pot of something savory simmering on the stove. The baby slept peacefully in a proper cradle, improvised from a dresser drawer lined with soft blankets. "She's stronger today," Clara reported, taking the formula well, "but she needs a name, Mr. Mallory." "Luke," he corrected automatically. "If you're staying, you might as well use my given name." "Luke, then." She nodded. "And the baby along?" He looked away. "I can't." "Can't what?" "Name her." The words felt ripped from somewhere vital. "Naming makes it real." Claire's expression softened slightly. "She is real whether you name her or not, and she's fighting to stay that way." Before Luke could respond, Caleb burst through the door, his face grave. "Riders coming. At least 6. He grabbed his shotgun, and they're not stopping at the property line this time. Luke checked his revolver, the familiar weight both comforting and damning. "Get Clara and the baby to the root cellar." Clara was already moving, gathering the infant and a few supplies. "What are you going to do?" The question hung between them, between the man who'd buried his gun and the one who now wore it again. "Whatever I have to," Luke answered, the words tasting like ash. "Whatever I have to." Luke positioned himself behind the overturned oak table, the Colt Navy steady in his hand. Through the window, he counted 6 riders approaching, 4 in front, 2 hanging back. Their formation suggested men accustomed to violence, not railroad surveyors. "They'll try the door first," Caleb muttered, crouched by the stone fireplace. "Make it look official before things turn ugly." Luke nodded. 3 years of war had taught him the choreography of confrontation. When they do, aim high, warning shots only. And if they don't take the warning, the question hung between them as hoofbeats stopped outside. Luke thought of Clara and the baby hidden in the root cellar of Mary's grave, still fresh on the hillside, of the line he'd promised her he wouldn't cross again. "Then God help us all," he said quietly. Heavy boots thumped on the porch. A fist hammered the door. "Mallory, open up, by order of Judge Harmon." Luke took a steadying breath. "State your business." "Court order to inspect the property. Open up or we'll force entry." "Slide the paper under the door," Luke called. "I'll read it first." A pause, then low voices conferring outside. Not the response they'd expected. "Don't have time for games, Mallory. Open up now." "No paper, no entry," Luke replied. "That's the law even in Silver Creek." Another pause, longer this time. Luke glanced at Caleb, who gave a grim nod. They both knew what came next. The door splintered inward, kicked hard from outside. Luke fired over the intruder's head, the Colt's report deafening in the confined space. Caleb's shotgun followed, pellets embedding in the ceiling. "That's your one warning," Luke shouted, Next one counts. Instead of retreating, the man rolled inside, drawing his pistol as he moved. Two more pushed in behind him, using the doorframe as cover. Outside, the remaining men dismounted, seeking firing positions. Last chance, Mallory, the leader called. Judge says this land belongs to the territory now. Nothing personal. Luke's finger tightened on the trigger. One clean shot and at least one threat would be eliminated. Just like Gettysburg. Just like Antietam. The familiar cold clarity of combat descended over him, the world narrowing to targets and angles. Luke, Clara's voice cut through his battle focus. She stood in the root cellar doorway, the baby clutched to her chest. There's another way. The intruders swung their weapons toward the new voice. Luke fired instinctively, his bullet grazing the leader's arm. The man yelled in pain, dropping his pistol. Hold your fire, Clara shouted, her voice carrying surprising authority. I'm Clara Bellwright of the Montana Post. Every move you make is being documented for publication. She held up a small leather-bound notebook, including Judge Harmon's illegal seizure attempt without proper papers. The men hesitated, looking to their wounded leader for direction. She's bluffing, he growled, clutching his bleeding arm. Am I? Clara's chin lifted. My editor has instructions to publish everything if I don't return to Helena, including the investigation into 5 suspicious deaths on properties acquired by Northern Pacific. The leader's face tightened with uncertainty. You're interfering with official business, lady. I'm witnessing an attempted murder and land theft, Clara corrected. Now lower your weapons before I add your names to my article. For a moment, the outcome balanced on a knife's edge. Then the leader signaled a retreat. This isn't over, Mallory, he spat. Harmon will hear about the journalist. I'm counting on it, Clara replied evenly. The men backed out slowly, half dragging their wounded companion. Luke kept his Colt trained on them until they mounted and rode away, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance. Only then did he lower the gun, his hands shaking with delayed reaction. The familiar post-battle tremor he'd hoped never to experience again. That was either very brave or very foolish, he said to Clara. Sometimes they're the same thing. She approached the baby, whimpering against her shoulder. Are you all right? Luke looked down at the Colt still warm in his hand. 5 years of peace undone in an instant. No, but I'm alive, which is something. Caleb began writing furniture, his movements betraying his age. They'll be back, with real papers next time. Then we need to be ready. Luke holstered the revolver. And we need to know exactly what we're fighting. Clara nodded. I think it's time I told you everything I know about Judge Samuel Harmon and why your wife might not have died from childbed fever after all. The lamp burned low as Clara spread her notes across the kitchen table. Outside, the winter night pressed against the windows, the temperature dropping with the sun. 5 ranchers, she began, pointing to a hand-drawn map, all with property along the projected railroad route, all dead or disappeared within 8 months. Luke studied the map, noting how the properties formed a rough line cutting through the territory, including his own land. William Cooper found dead in his well, accident according to Harmon's inquest. Thomas Ferguson disappeared after supposedly selling to Northern Pacific, though no one saw him leave. James Sullivan, house fire with him inside. Robert Jackson, apparent suicide after his wife's sudden illness. And Peter Mitchell died of stomach ailments 3 days after refusing Northern Pacific's offer. And you think these were murders? Caleb asked. I know they were. Clara's voice hardened. Because the same pattern occurred in Dakota Territory when Northern Pacific came through there. Different judge, same methods. Luke's mind worked through the implications. But Mary died in childbirth. Dr. Lang was here. Clara nodded. I'm not suggesting she was shot or strangled, Luke. There are subtler ways to eliminate obstacles, ways that look natural. The suggestion hung in the air, too terrible to contemplate, yet impossible to dismiss. Why, Luke finally asked. Why us the silver vein isn't that substantial? It's not just the silver, Clara pulled out another document. This is a geological survey commissioned by Northern Pacific last year. Your property sits at the only viable mountain pass for 50 miles. The railroad needs it regardless of minerals. The silver just makes it more valuable. Luke pushed back from the table, pacing to the window. Outside, stars glittered coldly in the black sky. Mary had loved stargazing. Had someone taken that from her? Taken her from their child? I need proof, he said finally. Not theories or patterns. If someone hurt Mary, I need to know who and how. Clara gathered her notes. That's why I'm here. But investigating Harmon is dangerous. These men tonight were just the beginning. I'm not afraid of Harmon or his men. You should be. Clara's expression was solemn. He doesn't just control the law in Silver Creek. He owns the bank, the land office, even influences the territorial governor. Cross him openly and you'll disappear like the others. Then what do you suggest? We give him what he wants, apparently. Clara's eyes gleamed with determination. I'll continue my investigation while playing the role of your hired help. Let Harmon think you're considering his offer while I gather evidence. Caleb cleared his throat. And if Harmon doesn't believe the act, then we'll need more than a bluff next time. Clara looked pointedly at Luke's holstered Colt. Are you prepared for that? The baby's cry from the makeshift cradle saved Luke from answering. Clara moved to tend her, leaving the question hanging between the three adults like gun smoke after a firefight. Later, as moonlight cast silver patterns across the cabin floor, Luke found Clara by the fire, the baby sleeping against her shoulder. She's stronger already, Clara noted, her voice soft in the stillness. A fighter like her father. Luke sat across from her. I wasn't always a fighter. Before the war, I was studying to be an engineer. I could design bridges, but couldn't harm a living thing. What changed? Fort Sumter, then Bull Run, then watching friends die. Luke stared into the flames. By Gettysburg, I could shoot a man without blinking. That's what war does. It makes killing easier each time. Clara studied him in the firelight. Is that why you buried your gun, with merry fear of how easy it might be? Partly. Luke met her gaze. I also made her a promise. No more violence. No more blood. A clean start in Montana. Some promises can't be kept, Luke. Not when others force your hand. I know. He looked toward the window beyond which lay Mary's disturbed grave. But breaking this one feels like losing her twice. Clara adjusted the sleeping infant. Tell me about her. About Mary. Something in her tone, professional curiosity mingled with genuine care, loosened the knot in Luke's chest. She was a battlefield nurse. Patched me up after Gettysburg when the surgeons wanted to take my arm. Stubborn as sunrise she was. Wouldn't give up on me even when I'd given up on myself. The memories came easier now, washing through him like spring thaw after long winter. She loved books, poetry especially. Brought a trunk full west, said we'd need beautiful words in this hard country. Planted flowers around the cabin last spring. Said every home needs growing things. Clara smiled. She sounds remarkable. She was. Luke swallowed hard. The day before the baby came, she was making plans for spring planting. Said this valley reminded her of paradise in scripture. The fire popped and settled, sending sparks up the chimney. If someone took her from us, Luke said finally, I'll find them, no matter what it costs. Clara's expression grew serious. Be careful with that kind of promise, Luke. Vengeance has destroyed better men than you. It's not vengeance, it's justice. The line between them is thinner than you think. She rose carefully, cradling the sleeping infant. We should all rest. Tomorrow we start our performance for Judge Harmon. As she turned toward her room, Luke called softly, Clara. She paused. Thank you for today, for... He gestured helplessly at the baby. Clara's smile was tired but genuine. She deserves a chance, Luke. We all do. Silver Creek consisted of little more than a single muddy street lined with false-fronted buildings. A church, a general store, a saloon, and the imposing two-story courthouse that dominated the town's eastern end. Despite the early hour, the street bustled with activity, miners heading to claims, merchants opening shops, women drawing water from the town pump. Luke guided the wagon carefully through the rutted street, Clara beside him, holding the baby wrapped against the morning chill. They'd agreed this public appearance was necessary. Let the town see them together, start the whispers that would inevitably reach Harmon's ears. Remember, Clara murmured, I'm just a hired caretaker. Nothing more, Sirena. Luke nodded, keeping his expression neutral as he pulled the wagon before the general store. Eyes followed them, curious, judgmental, speculative. A widow man with a new woman barely 2 weeks after burying his wife. Scandal traveled faster than telegraph in frontier towns. Inside the store, the whispers paused momentarily as they entered, then resumed with greater intensity. The storekeeper, a barrel-chested man named Wilson, greeted them with barely concealed curiosity. Mallory, been a while. His eyes darted to Clara and the infant. Sorry about your missus. Thank you. Luke began listing supplies they needed, conscious of the audience their presence had attracted. Flour, coffee, sugar, condensed milk, cloth diapers if you have them. Wilson filled the order, stealing glances at Clara. Don't believe I've had the pleasure, miss. Bell right, Clara supplied smoothly. I'm caring for Mr. Mallory's daughter while he arranges for a permanent situation. Her delivery was perfect, professional, slightly detached. Just a hired help, nothing improper. From Helena, she added, as if it explained everything. Wilson nodded sagely. Heard they have agencies for such things. Proper ones, I mean. The implied question hung in the air. Miss Bellwright came highly recommended, Luke said, ending the inquiry. As Wilson tallied their purchases, the courthouse door across the street opened. Judge Samuel Harmon emerged deep in conversation with a well-dressed man Luke didn't recognize. Clara tensed beside him. That's Walter Thompson, she whispered. Northern Pacific's land acquisition director. Luke watched the men shake hands before Harmon noticed the wagon outside the store. The judge's expression shifted from jovial to calculating as he altered course, heading directly toward them. Play along, Clara murmured, adjusting the baby in her arms. Harmon entered the store with Thompson a step behind. The other customers withdrew slightly, sensing the power dynamics at play. Mr. Mallory, Harmon's voice boomed with false bonhomie. Glad to see you in town. And with... His gaze fixed on Clara, eyes narrowing slightly. Judge Harmon, Luke acknowledged stiffly. This is Miss Bellwright. She's helping with my daughter. How fortunate you found assistance so quickly. Harmon studied Clara with undisguised suspicion. Miss Bellwright, you're new to our little community. Just arrived from Helena, she replied, her demeanor respectful but reserved. Mr. Mallory needed urgent help with the baby. Indeed. Harmon's smile didn't reach his eyes. Silver Creek is always welcoming to new faces, especially those who understand our community values. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. I'm sure Miss Bellwright will adapt quickly, Luke interjected. We should be getting back. The baby needs her rest. Of course, of course. Harmon stepped aside, then added, Oh, I'd planned to visit you tomorrow, Marjorie, to continue our discussion about your property. Mr. Thompson here is most interested. The well-dressed man stepped forward, extending his hand. Walter Thompson, Northern Pacific Railroad. Your land is of particular interest to our expansion plans, Mr. Mallory. Luke shook the offered hand briefly. As I told Judge Harmon, I'm not interested in selling. Thompson's smile was practiced. Everyone has a price, sir. Ours is quite generous, especially for a man in your circumstances. His gaze flicked meaningfully to the baby in Clara's arms. Perhaps we could discuss it tomorrow, Clara suggested, her voice soft but clear. Mr. Mallory has had little sleep since the birth. Both men looked at her with surprise, a hired helper speaking out of turn. And you are involved in Mr. Mallory's business decisions, Harmon asked coldly. Miss Bellwright is right, Luke cut in. Tomorrow would be better, afternoon perhaps. Harmon's eyes hadn't left Clara. Very well, 3 o'clock at your ranch. Mr. Thompson is eager to make this transaction as smooth as possible. I'll be there, Luke agreed, gathering their purchases. Good day, gentlemen. Outside, he helped Clara into the wagon, conscious of the men watching through the store window. He suspects something, Clara said under her breath. Let him suspect. He can't prove anything. The baby fussed as they pulled away from town, her tiny face scrunching against the cold. He's more dangerous than I thought, Clara said once they were safely out of earshot. Did you see how he looked at me like he was memorizing my face? You worried, not for myself. She glanced down at the infant. But bringing a child into this fight... Luke's hands tightened on the reins. She's already in it. We all are. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking beneath them, each lost in thought. Finally, as the ranch came into view, Clara spoke again. There's something I didn't tell you last night about the investigation. Luke glanced at her, noting the tension in her shoulders. I knew one of the men who died, Robert Jackson, the suicide after his wife fell ill. He was my husband's friend. Luke reined the horses to a stop. Your husband. Daniel was a journalist too, Chicago Tribune. Her voice grew distant. He was investigating corruption in the railroad industry when he was killed. 3 years ago. I'm sorry. Don't be, I continued his work. Her eyes met his, fierce with determination. That's how I recognized the pattern when it started happening in Montana. Same methods, different territory. Luke studied her face, seeing it properly for the first time, the strength beneath the beauty, the purpose behind the professional demeanor. This isn't just an investigation for you, he realized. It's personal. Everything worthwhile is personal, Luke. She adjusted the baby who had fallen asleep against her. That's why I understand your need for justice. I've lived with the same hunger for 3 years. The confession hung between them, changing something fundamental in their arrangement. No longer just allies of convenience, but partners in a shared crusade. We'll find the truth, Luke promised. For Mary, for your Daniel, for all of them. Clara nodded, her expression softening as she looked down at the sleeping infant. And for her, she deserves to know her mother didn't die by chance. Caleb was waiting when they returned, his weathered face grave. Riders came while you were gone, he reported. Left this under the door. He handed Luke a folded paper bearing the territorial court's seal. Inside, formal language outlined an inquest into Mary Mallory's death scheduled for the following week. An inquest? Why now? Luke scanned the document. It's been 2 weeks. It's Harmon, Clara said, reading over his shoulder. He's trying to establish official cause of death before we can investigate. But why? Luke frowned. What difference does it make to him? Clara took the paper, studying it carefully. Because if Mary died of natural causes officially, then any suggestion otherwise becomes slander. He's covering his tracks. Caleb spat onto the ground. Bastard works fast. Must have ordered this right after seeing you in town. Luke folded the paper, tucking it into his coat. Then we work faster. Clara, what do we need to prove your theory about Mary? Access to Dr. Lang's records, samples from your well and food stores, and, she hesitated, and permission to examine Mary's body. The request struck Luke like a physical blow. No, absolutely not. Luke, if she was poisoned, there might still be traces. I said no. His voice rose sharply, startling the baby awake. She's been through enough. Let her rest in peace. Clara handed the crying infant to Caleb, then faced Luke directly. I understand your feelings, truly. But if Harmon poisoned Mary, her body is evidence. Evidence that could save your daughter from the same fate. Luke turned away, unable to bear the truth in her words. The thought of Mary's body being disturbed, examined, violated, even in death. There must be another way, he insisted. Maybe there is. Clara's tone softened. Did Mary keep a journal, letters, anything recording her symptoms before the birth? Luke paused. She wrote in her diary every night. I haven't looked at it since. Where is it? In our bedroom. Her trunk. Clara nodded. That's where we start. Her own words might tell us what happened. Later, Luke stood before Mary's trunk, his hand hesitating on the brass latch. Opening it felt like trespassing, somehow breaching the final privacy of the dead. Clara waited silently behind him, respecting his struggle. Finally, he lifted the lid. The scent of lavender and paper rose to greet him, Mary's scent. Inside neatly folded clothing lay atop books, letters, and mementos from their life together. Luke gently moved these aside until he found the leather-bound journal Mary had written in faithfully since their marriage. Here, he said, his voice rough as he handed it to Clara. I can't read it myself. Clara accepted the journal with appropriate solemnity. I'll be respectful, Luke, I promise. For hours, she sat by the fire, carefully turning pages while Luke paced and Caleb cleaned weapons in preparation for tomorrow's meeting. The baby slept peacefully in her makeshift cradle, unaware of the storm gathering around her existence. Finally, as evening shadows lengthened across the cabin floor, Clara closed the journal. Luke, she said quietly, you need to see this. He approached reluctantly, sitting beside her as she opened to entries from the weeks before Mary's death. She describes feeling increasingly ill throughout her final month. Weakness, stomach pains, headaches. Clara pointed to specific passages. These aren't typical pregnancy symptoms, Luke. They're consistent with arsenic poisoning. Luke read Mary's familiar handwriting, each word a knife twisting in his gut. Strange metallic taste today. Dr. Lang says it's normal in pregnancy, but I've never experienced this before. Luke brought fresh water from the new well. It tastes odd, but everything does lately. And later, terrible stomach pains again, hair coming out in my brush. Dr. Lang suggested iron supplements, but they make me sicker. Something isn't right. I'm afraid for the baby. The final entry dated the day before she died. Too weak to get out of bed today. Luke is worried sick. I haven't told him my fears about the water. The new well is too close to where those men were surveying last month. If something happens to me, Luke must protect our child from them. She is all that will remain of us. Luke's hand trembled as he turned the page, finding only blank paper where Mary's life had ended. She knew, he whispered. She suspected something was wrong with the water. Clara nodded grimly. The new well you dug after finding silver. Did anyone else know about it? Just Caleb and Mary. I didn't register it with the land office yet. Luke's mind raced. But Harmon's men were surveying nearby last fall. Mary mentions them. They could have contaminated your water source. Clara's expression hardened. It's a common method. Arsenic is virtually tasteless in small doses accumulates over time. By the time symptoms appear, it's often too late. Luke stood abruptly, his grief transforming into white-hot rage. I'll kill him. Tomorrow when he comes, I'll put a bullet in his head. And then what? Clara challenged. You'll hang your daughter, becomes an orphan, and Northern Pacific still gets your land. Is that what Mary would want? The question stopped him cold. We need proof, Luke. Legal proof that will stand in territorial court. Clara held up the journal. This is a start, but we need more. Scientific evidence of poisoning. The water, Caleb suggested from across the room. If they poison, the well traces might remain. Clara nodded. And we need Dr. Lang's testimony. If Mary showed symptoms of poisoning, he might have noticed even if he misdiagnosed the cause. Luke forced his breathing to steady, pushing down the killing rage. Lang comes to check on the baby tomorrow morning. We'll speak to him then. A plan began forming evidence witnesses' legal recourse. Justice through law rather than violence. It felt foreign after the immediacy of combat, but Luke recognized its wisdom. Tomorrow we play our parts, he agreed finally. Let Harmon and Thompson think I'm considering their offer. Meanwhile, we gather proof. Clara smiled approvingly. Now you're thinking like a journalist instead of a soldier. I'm thinking like a husband and father, Luke corrected. Mary deserves justice, but our daughter needs protection more. The baby stirred in her cradle, making small noises of hunger. Clara rose to tend her, but Luke motioned her back. I'll do it, he said, lifting his daughter carefully. For the first time, he truly looked at her, this tiny being who carried Mary's features in his own stubborn chin. Not just a burden or a reminder of loss, but a person. His child. Hope, he said suddenly. Clara looked up. What? Her name. Hope. Luke cradled the infant closer. It's what Mary would have wanted. Hope for the future, even in darkness. Clara's expression softened. It's perfect. Hope squirmed in his arms, her tiny hand grasping his finger with surprising strength. In that moment, Luke made a silent vow different from his promise to Mary, but no less sacred. Justice would come, but not through blind vengeance. He would build a future worthy of Mary's sacrifice and Hope's innocence, and God help anyone who stood in his way. Dawn broke clear and cold, the sky changing from black to indigo to pale blue as Luke checked the property boundaries. No sign of intruders since yesterday, but the stillness felt temporary, the quiet before battle that every soldier learns to distrust. He'd spent the night testing the well water, using methods Clara had learned during her investigations. Simple tests with copper coins and white paper showed the faint discoloration that suggested arsenic. Not conclusive, but damning enough to warrant further investigation. Dr. Lang arrived as promised, his buggy crunching through the fresh snow. The old physician looked tired, the weight of frontier medicine evident in the stoop of his shoulders. The baby seems remarkably improved, he noted after examination. Whatever formula Miss Bellwright devised is working wonders. Luke exchanged glances with Clara, who nodded slightly. Doctor, we need to discuss Mary's death, Luke said carefully. Did you notice anything unusual about her symptoms before the birth? Lang's bushy eyebrows rose. Unusual, numb. Difficult pregnancy, certainly. Weakness, fatigue, common enough in frontier women without proper nutrition. What about metallic taste, hair loss, stomach pains? Clara pressed, citing symptoms from Mary's journal. The doctor frowned. She mentioned some digestive discomfort, yes. I prescribe bismuth powder, but these aren't unusual in late pregnancy. Could they also be symptoms of arsenic poisoning? Luke asked bluntly. Lang's expression shifted from surprise to wariness. What exactly are you suggesting, Mallory? We have reason to believe Mary was poisoned, deliberately. Luke held the doctor's gaze. Through our well water. The accusation hung in the air between them. Lang looked from Luke to Clara, then to Caleb standing guard by the window. That's a serious allegation, one that would require significant evidence. We're gathering it, Clara replied. But we need your help, doctor. Your professional opinion could be crucial. Lang removed his spectacles, polishing them slowly. You understand what you're implying? That someone in Silver Creek committed murder? That's not an accusation made lightly in a frontier community. We don't make it lightly, Luke assured him. But Mary's journal, our well water tests, and the pattern of deaths along the railroad route would point to deliberate poisoning. The doctor replaced his spectacles, his expression troubled. I've been in Silver Creek 15 years, delivered half the town's children, buried their parents. He sighed heavily. And I've had concerns about certain deaths, ones that didn't quite fit natural causes. Hope began to rise in Luke's chest. Then you'll help us, Lang raised a cautionary hand. Understand my position. Judge Harmon controls this territory. Cross him openly, and my practice, my ability to help anyone ends. We're not asking you to testify yet, Clara assured him, just to examine samples, confirm or deny our suspicions scientifically. And if I confirm them, what then? Luke and Clara exchanged glances. They hadn't planned that far ahead. Then we take the evidence to the territorial governor, Clara suggested, bypass Harmon entirely. Lang nodded slowly. A wise approach, but dangerous, very dangerous. He packed his medical bag thoughtfully, then extended his hand for the water samples. I'll test these properly in my surgery. If there is arsenic, I'll find it. His expression grew grave. But this stays between us until we have conclusive proof. My patient's safety depends on my discretion. Luke clasped the doctor's hand gratefully. Thank you. This means more than I can say. As Lang's buggy disappeared down the snow-covered track, Caleb called from his lookout position. Riders coming! From town! Luke tensed hand, moving automatically to his holstered Colt. How many? Just two, Harmon and Thompson by the look of it. Clara quickly gathered Mary's journal and the remaining water samples, hiding them in her room. Remember the plan, she cautioned. You're considering their offer. Nothing more. Luke nodded, steeling himself for the performance ahead. Playing the grieving widower considering selling out wouldn't be difficult. The grief part at least was genuine enough. What would test his control was facing the man he now suspected of murdering Mary, sitting across from him, making conversation, pretending ignorance of the monstrous crime. Luke, Clara said softly, reading his thoughts, justice, not vengeance, for hope's sake. He looked to where his daughter slept peacefully, unaware of the storm gathering around her tiny life. Justice, he agreed, though the word tasted hollow compared to the righteous fury burning in his chest. The riders approached slowly, giving Luke time to position himself on the porch shotgun, visibly present, but not directly threatening. A frontier welcome, cautious, but not overtly hostile. Judge Harmon dismounted first, his expensive coat marking him as a man of means even in this wilderness. Thompson followed, briefcase in hand, his city clothes ill-suited to the Montana winter. Mallory, Harmon called jovially, glad to see you're expecting us, much more civilized than yesterday's misunderstanding. Luke nodded stiffly. Judge, Mr. Thompson, please come in out of the cold. Inside, Clara had prepared coffee, playing her role as domestic help with convincing humility. She kept her eyes appropriately lowered as the men removed their coats, though Luke caught the sharp intelligence in her glance as she assessed Thompson's briefcase. Miss Bellwright, Harmon acknowledged with bare courtesy before turning his attention fully to Luke. Now then, Mr. Mallory, I believe you are ready to discuss Northern Pacific's generous offer for your property. Thompson opened his briefcase, removing documents with practiced efficiency. We're prepared to offer $5,000, Mr. Mallory, significantly above market value for undeveloped ranch land in this territory. Luke forced himself to appear considering. That's a substantial sum. Indeed, Thompson smiled. More than enough to establish yourself comfortably elsewhere. Perhaps somewhere more suitable for raising a child, Helena maybe. Or even back east. The suggestion came too close to Mary's parents' repeated attempts to convince them to return to Pennsylvania. Luke wondered if that was coincidental or if Harmon had researched his background thoroughly. The railroad values this property highly, Harmon added, sipping the coffee Clara had provided. The route through your land saves nearly 20 miles of track compared to alternatives. And the silver deposit? Luke asked casually. Thompson's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips, a telling hesitation. Silver. Harmon's surprise seemed genuine. What's silver? The vein I found while digging the new well last fall, Luke continued. Small but pure. I registered it with the Territorial Mining Office in Helena. This was a calculated lie. He'd found the silver but hadn't registered it yet. Clara had suggested the bluff to gauge their reaction. Thompson and Harmon exchanged glances, a silent communication that confirmed Luke's suspicions. They knew about the silver. Well, Thompson recovered smoothly. Any mineral rights would naturally be included in the purchase, though I wasn't aware of any significant deposits. Perhaps we should reconsider the offer amount, Harmon suggested. If there truly is silver, verified silver, the property value would increase accordingly. Luke leaned back, feigning consideration. How much would Northern Pacific pay for land with proven silver deposits? That would depend on the assay results. Thompson hedged. Perhaps $10,000 if the vein is substantial. Twice the original offer. Luke maintained his poker face, though inside his certainty grew. Mary had died for this silver, for this land. These men, or ones working for them, had poisoned his wife for profit. I'd need time to consider, he said finally. This land was meant to be my family's future. Of course, Harmon nodded sympathetically. Take a few days, but not too long, Mallory. The railroad has schedules to maintain. If we can't secure this route, we'll be forced to use alternative means. The threat hung in the air, thinly veiled. Before Luke could respond, commotion erupted outside, horses approaching at speed, men shouting. Caleb burst through the door, shotgun in hand. Luke's sheriff's posse, at least 8 men armed. Thompson looked genuinely confused, but Harmon's expression betrayed satisfaction, poorly disguised as concern. What's this about? Luke demanded, rising to his feet. Harmon spread his hands innocently. I couldn't say, unless... He paused dramatically. Unless it concerns the body found on your property this morning. What body? Oh, Clara's composure slipped momentarily. A tragic discovery, Harmon continued. One of our surveyors found human remains in the ravine behind your south pasture. Quite decomposed, but identifiable. Luke's blood ran cold. Whose body? The door crashed open before Harmon could answer. Sheriff Mills entered, flanked by deputies with drawn weapons. Luke Mallory, Mills announced formally, you're under arrest for the murder of Jeremy Harmon, the judge's son. The accusation struck like physical blow. Jeremy Harmon had been reported killed in the war 5 years ago. His name appeared on the casualty list after Antietam. This is absurd, Luke protested. Jeremy died during the war, everyone knows that. Apparently not, the sheriff replied coldly. His body was identified by his personal effects. Army uniform, insignia, and a distinctive pocket watch given to him by his father, which was found in a grave on your property, Mallory. Harmon added, his grief-stricken expression belied by the triumph in his eyes. Now, why would my son, reportedly killed at Antietam, be buried on your Montana ranch? Luke looked to Clara, whose face had drained of color. This was no coincidence, the timing too perfect, the trap too well laid. I fought at Antietam, Luke said slowly, but I never met your son. I never killed him. The evidence suggests otherwise, Sheriff Mills replied, producing handcuffs. You're coming with us, Mallory. The judge has called a special inquest for tomorrow morning. As the deputies moved to restrain him, Luke's eyes found Clara's. In that momentary connection, a silent message passed between them. This changes everything. Harmon had outmaneuvered them, accelerating his plan before they could gather evidence about Mary's death. Now Luke faced a murder charge, a hanging offense, while his infant daughter remained vulnerable. Take care of Hope, he told Clara as the deputies dragged him toward the door. Whatever happens, protect her. Clara nodded, her expression resolute despite the fear in her eyes. I will. I promise. Outside, Luke was roughly mounted on a horse, his hands cuffed before him. As the posse prepared to depart, Judge Harmon approached, leaning close to speak privately. "You should have taken the money, Mallory." His voice held no pretense of civility now. "Now you'll hang your brat will disappear, and I'll still have your land. Just like I planned from the beginning." Luke lunged against his restraints, nearly toppling from the saddle. "If you touch my daughter, I'll kill you." "I swear to God." Harmon smiled coldly. Threats against a judge, another charge for the list. He stepped back, addressing the sheriff. "Take him away. Justice awaits." As the posse rode toward town, Luke twisted in the saddle for one last glimpse of the ranch. Clara stood on the porch. Hope clutched protectively to her chest, Caleb beside her with shotgun ready. His family, his responsibility. And he was leaving them to face Harmon's wrath alone. The knowledge burned worse than any physical wound he'd suffered in war. Worse even than burying Mary. Because this time the threat was clear, the enemy identified, and Luke was powerless to protect those who depended on him. Unless a plan began forming, desperate, dangerous, but possible. If he could escape, gather the evidence Lang was collecting, reach the territorial governor somehow. The path ahead was narrow and treacherous, but Luke Mallory had survived Antietam, Fredericksburg, and Gettysburg. He'd survived losing Mary. He would survive this too. For hope, for justice, for the truth about Jeremy Harmon's mysterious appearance on his land, a young man supposedly killed in a battle where Luke himself had fought. There was a connection there, a truth waiting to be uncovered, and Luke intended to find it or die trying. The Silver Creek jail consisted of 2 iron-barred cells in the courthouse basement, damp and cold as a tomb. Luke sat on the narrow cot listening to water drip somewhere in the darkness. They'd taken his gun belt, his boots, even his coat, standard precautions against escape. Outside, a guard dozed in a chair, keys jangling at his belt with each snoring breath. Luke closed his eyes, mentally mapping the settlement. The courthouse stood at the east end of town, a day's ride from his ranch. To the north lay wilderness, to the south and west scattered homesteads. The nearest telegraph office was in Helena, 3 days hard riding in good weather. In winter, perhaps a week. No help would come from that direction. Not in time for tomorrow's inquest, Harmon's hasty charade of justice. The guard stirred, mumbling something before settling deeper into sleep. Luke studied him, young, perhaps 20, with a deputy's badge pinned carelessly to his shirt. Not a professional lawman, just one of Harmon's followers given temporary authority. Luke tested the cell door. Solid iron recently installed. No weakness in the hinges or lock. Whoever had built this jail had done thorough work, likely anticipating desperate prisoners. Footsteps echoed down the stone stairwell, 2 sets, one heavy, one lighter. Luke retreated to his cot, feigning sleep, as Sheriff Mills and Judge Harmon appeared. "Wake up, Mallory," Mills called, rapping his pistol against the bars. "Got a visitor." Luke opened his eyes slowly, masking his alertness. "Come to gloat, Harmon." The judge smiled thinly. "Merely ensuring you're comfortable before tomorrow's proceedings. It's important that justice be seen as humane even to murderers. We both know I didn't kill your son. The evidence suggests otherwise." Harmon clasped his hands behind his back, assuming a judicial pose even in this dank cellar. "Jeremy's body on your land, his personal effects nearby, your documented presence at Antietam, where he reportedly died." "Thousands of men fought at Antietam," Luke countered, "and I've never met your son." "The jury will determine that." Harmon signaled to Mills, who retreated up the stairs, leaving them all open, save for the sleeping deputy. "Though I'm authorized to offer alternatives." Luke sat up straighter. "What alternatives?" "Sign the land transfer to Northern Pacific tonight. Confess to killing Jeremy in a wartime confusion, friendly fire perhaps. I'll commute your sentence to exile from the territory." The offer hung in the damp air between them. "And my daughter," Harmon's smile never reached his eyes, "would be placed with a suitable family, of course. Perhaps even accompany you depending on your level of cooperation." Luke recognized the lie immediately. Once he signed the land transfer, he'd be worthless to Harmon. Probably shot while attempting escape before morning. "I need time to consider," he stalled. "You have until dawn." Harmon turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and don't concern yourself about Miss Bellwright. She's being escorted back to Helena tonight. Seems her credentials as a caretaker are questionable." Luke maintained his neutral expression with effort. "The baby needs care. Indeed, Mrs. Wilson from the general store has volunteered to look after the child temporarily, until more permanent arrangements can be made. The threat couldn't be clearer. Sign or lose everything: his land, his freedom, his daughter. Perhaps even Clara if Harmon's men were escorting her back to Helena. After Harmon departed, Luke returned to the cell door, examining it with renewed determination. The sleeping deputy now represented his only chance. "Hey," Luke called softly. "Deputy, need some water here." The young man stirred, blinking sleepily. "Quiet, prisoner. You'll get water in the morning." "My throat," Luke rasped, forcing a cough. "Please, just a dipper." The deputy hesitated, then grudgingly rose. "Stand back from the bars." Luke complied, watching as the young man retrieved a ladle from the water bucket near his desk. As he approached the cell, Luke noted the keys dangling from his belt, the pistol holstered carelessly on his hip. "Here." The deputy extended the water through the bars. "Now shut up and let me sleep." Luke accepted the ladle, deliberately spilling water onto the deputy's outstretched arm. "Sorry," he apologized, reaching through the bars as if to wipe the spill. In one fluid motion born from years of combat, Luke seized the deputy's wrist and slammed it against the iron bars. The young man's surprised cry cut short as Luke's other hand clamped over his mouth, yanking him hard against the cell. "Keys," Luke hissed. "Now." The deputy struggled briefly before Luke increased pressure on his wrist near breaking point. With his free hand, the young man fumbled for the key ring. "Quietly," Luke warned, "or I snap it." The deputy complied, passing the keys through the bars. Luke maintained his grip while unlocking the cell one-handed, a difficult maneuver, but one he managed through sheer determination. Once free, he dragged the deputy into the cell, quickly gagging him with a torn stracita blanket and binding his hands with another. The young man's eyes were wide with fear as Luke relieved him of his revolver and gun belt. "I'm not going to kill you," Luke assured him quietly, "but I can't let you raise the alarm." He locked the cell, pocketing the keys. The deputy's boots were too small for his feet, but the young man's coat would provide some protection against the winter night. Luke took these along with the deputy's hat and cautiously ascended the stairs. The courthouse above was dark and silent. Through a window, Luke could see Main Street largely deserted, a few lights glowing in distant windows. The saloon would still be active, but the rest of Silver Creek slept unaware of the injustice unfolding in their midst. Luke slipped through the back door, keeping to shadows, as he navigated the alleyway behind the buildings. His first instinct was to head directly for the ranch, but logic intervened. That would be the first place they'd look. Instead, he turned toward Dr. Lang's surgery at the western edge of town. If the doctor had found evidence of arsenic in the water samples, that proof might be Luke's only leverage against Harmon. The night air bit through his inadequate clothing, the cold seeping into his stockinged feet as he crept along the silent street. Every shadow concealed potential danger. Every creak of a sign in the wind froze him mid-step. Lang's surgery occupied the ground floor of a modest, two-story building, the doctor's residence above. A single lamp burned in an upstairs window, Lang working late or perhaps unable to sleep. Luke approached cautiously, circling to the back entrance, used for discreet patient visits. The door was locked as expected. He debated breaking a window, but decided against the noise. Instead, he gathered small pebbles from the frozen ground and tossed them against the upstairs window. After several attempts, the curtain moved. Lang's face appeared briefly, eyes widening at the sight of Luke below. The doctor disappeared, and moments later the back door opened. "Mallory," Lang whispered urgently. "What in God's name?" "No time," Luke interrupted, slipping inside. "Harmon's framed me for murder. I need the water test results." Lang secured the door, leading Luke through the darkened surgery to his private office. "This is madness. They'll hang you for escaping regardless of the charges." "They'll hang me anyway." Luke's voice was flat. "Harmon wants my land. The charges are just theater." Lang lit a small lamp, illuminating a cluttered desk covered with scientific equipment, vials of chemicals, and medical journals. He retrieved a notebook from a locked drawer. "I completed the tests an hour ago," he said gravely. "You were right. Arsenic in the well water at lethal concentrations. No natural explanation possible." Luke's breath caught. So Mary was murdered. "Poisoned systematically over weeks," Lang confirmed. "The symptoms in her journal match perfectly. By the time she went into labor, her system was already failing. The birth merely accelerated the inevitable." A cold rage settled over Luke, crystalline and clarifying. I need your testimony, doctor, and these test results. Lang's expression grew troubled. To whom Harmon controls the local judiciary completely. The territorial governor, or the federal marshal in Helena. That's 3 days' ride in good weather, Lang pointed out. Longer in winter, and they'll be hunting you by dawn. I don't have a choice. Luke began pacing the small office. Harmon has my daughter. He's sending Clara back to Helena under escort. If I don't stop him now, I lose everything. Lang removed his spectacles, pinching the bridge of his nose tiredly. There's something else you should know. About Jeremy Harmon. Luke paused. What about him? He didn't die at Antietam. Lang's voice dropped lower, at least not in the way reported. What do you mean? Jeremy returned from the war severely wounded, not dead as officially claimed. Judge Harmon kept him hidden at their hunting lodge north of town. I treated him there secretly for nearly a year. Luke struggled to process this revelation. Why the deception? Why claim his son died if he didn't? Insurance money primarily. The judge had taken out an enormous policy on Jeremy before he enlisted, but there was more. Lang hesitated. Jeremy knew things about his father's business dealings, things that could have ruined Harmon. What things? Land fraud, bribery, perhaps worse. Jeremy was unstable after his injuries, morphine addiction, violent outbursts. Harmon feared his son might expose everything during one of his episodes. Luke leaned against the desk, the implications clicking into place. So Harmon kept him hidden, collected the insurance, then what Jeremy actually died. Lang nodded grimly. About 3 years ago, I certified the death private family matter, no official record. He was buried on Harmon property, or so I was told. Then how did his body end up on my land? That, Lang said quietly, is the question that's kept me awake tonight. The only explanation is that someone moved the remains deliberately to frame you. The pieces aligned with sickening clarity. Harmon had orchestrated everything: Mary's poisoning, the false murder charge, even the strategic placement of his own son's remains, all to secure Luke's land for Northern Pacific. I need to get to Helena, Luke decided. With your test results and testimony, the governor would have to intervene. You'll never make it alone, Lang cautioned. Not in winter with Harmon's men hunting you. I don't have a choice. Perhaps you do. Lang moved to a cabinet, retrieving a sealed envelope. This came from Miss Bellwright today. Special courier from Helena. I was asked to deliver it tomorrow. Luke accepted the envelope, noting the Montana Post insignia. You've been helping Clara. Cautiously, providing information when I could. Lang's expression hardened. I've watched Harmon destroy too many lives in this town. Mary was the last straw. Luke broke the seal, unfolding several pages of official-looking documents. As he read, his heart raced with new hope. These are land records, he said, scanning quickly. Northern Pacific filings, construction plans, and he paused at the final page. A federal investigation notice. The Department of Interior is examining Northern Pacific's land acquisitions throughout the territory. Meaning Clara's newspaper investigations got attention in Washington. Luke refolded the papers carefully. This could stop Harmon if we can get it to the right people. Lang considered for a moment. There's a telegraph office in Benton Springs, half a day's ride northeast. You could wire the governor from there. I'll need a horse. Luke's mind raced through the logistics. And supplies. I can provide those, Lang offered, but not until morning without arousing suspicion. And by then Harmon's men will be searching everywhere. Luke paced again, weighing impossible options. I need to get back to the ranch first. Warn Clara, get Hope somewhere safe. If they're truly escorting Miss Bellwright to Helena tonight, they've already left, Lang pointed out. And your daughter is likely with the Wilsons by now. Luke shook his head. Caleb wouldn't let them take Hope without a fight, and Clara's too smart to leave willingly. A sudden commotion outside interrupted their planning voices, shouting, lanterns flaring to life along Main Street. Lang peered cautiously through the curtains. They've discovered your escape. The sheriff's forming search parties. Luke's options narrowed to a desperate few. Is there a back way out of town? Something they won't think to watch immediately. The old mining trail past the cemetery. Lang moved quickly to a chest, retrieving a worn but serviceable pair of boots. These should fit. Take them in this. He handed Luke a small medical bag. Bandages, laudanum, basic supplies. You may need them. What about you? When they learn you helped me, I'll claim you forced me at gunpoint. Lang smiled grimly. Not entirely untrue given the circumstances. Luke donned the boots, checking the deputy's revolver. 5 rounds plus the 6th under the hammer. Not much against what might be coming. Head north initially. Lang advised, sketching a crude map on a prescription pad. Double back to your ranch using the ridge trail. From there, Benton Springs is here. He indicated a point northeast. The telegraph operator is Samuel Griffin. Tell him I sent you. We served together in the Mexican War. Luke memorized the map, then clasped the doctor's hand. I can't thank you enough. Just bring Harmon to justice, Lang replied. For Mary, for all of them. Moments later, Luke slipped out the back door into the frigid night. The commotion on Main Street provided cover as he made his way to the cemetery, ducking between headstones until he reached the barely visible trail beyond. The old mining path wound through dense pines, ascending steeply into the foothills. Luke pushed forward, despite burning lungs and aching feet, putting distance between himself and the manhunt forming behind him. As dawn's first gray light touched the eastern horizon, he reached a vantage point overlooking Silver Creek. Lanterns still moved through the streets below, but the search appeared concentrated south, the most direct route to his ranch. Harmon's men were predictable, at least. Luke consulted Lang's map, plotting a circuitous route that would bring him to the ranch from the north, hopefully undetected. The journey would take most of the day, but stealth mattered more than speed now. Hours passed in grueling progress through snow-laden forest and rocky ridgelines. Luke pushed through exhaustion, driven by images of Hope's tiny face, of Clara's determined eyes, of Mary's grave, desecrated by the men who had poisoned her. By mid-afternoon, he approached his property from the northern ridge, using a stand of pines for cover as he surveyed the scene below. What he saw stopped his heart. Smoke billowed from the cabin, not the controlled plume of a heating fire, but the chaotic billows of a structure burning. Even from this distance, Luke could see flames consuming the home he'd built with Mary. No, he whispered, abandoning caution to scramble down the ridge. No, no, no. He ran the final quarter-mile, heedless of who might see him. The heat struck like a physical wall as he approached the inferno that had been his home. The roof had already collapsed, walls buckling inward as fire devoured everything. "Caleb!" he shouted, circling desperately. "Clara!" No response but the fire's hungry roar. Luke searched frantically for signs of struggle, for bodies, for any clue to what had happened. Behind the barn, somehow spared from the blaze, he found hoof prints. Many horses, perhaps a dozen, had stood there recently. A scuffle had disturbed the snow, and dark stains that could only be blood marked a trail toward the barn door. Luke drew the deputy's revolver, approaching cautiously. "Caleb, Clara." A weak cough answered from within. Luke pushed open the door to find Caleb propped against a hay bale, his shirt soaked red, a makeshift bandage pressed to his shoulder. "Took your time," the old soldier rasped. Luke knelt beside him, examining the wound. Gunshot through and through, bleeding heavily, but not immediately fatal. "What happened? Where are Clara and Hope?" Caleb grimaced as Luke applied fresh pressure to the wound. "Harmon's men came at dawn, maybe 15 of them. Said they had orders to escort Clara to Helena, take the baby to town." "You fought them." "Damn right I did." Pride flickered through the pain in Caleb's eyes. "Got 3 before they winged me. Would have finished me if not for Clara." "Where is she? Where's Hope?" "Clara grabbed the baby and your Winchester held him off while I crawled in here. Told him she'd shoot the first man who tried to take the child." Caleb coughed, spitting blood. "Brave woman, bought time for Jackson to arrive." "Jackson. You remember Thomas Jackson, colored sergeant from your regiment, has that settlement up in Thieves Valley?" Luke nodded. During the war, Jackson had served as a scout, one of the best trackers in the Union Army, and among the few black men to receive a battlefield commission. "What was Jackson doing here?" "I sent word yesterday after they took you. Figured we might need help." Caleb shifted, wincing. "He showed up with 8 men, all veterans. Harmon's boys didn't expect that kind of resistance." Relief washed through Luke. "So Clara and Hope are safe with Jackson?" Caleb nodded weakly. "Headed for Thieves Valley. Safest place for them with you locked up. Harmon's jurisdiction doesn't reach there, too many armed men with nothing to lose. And the fire. Harmon's parting gift. Said if he couldn't have the land legally, he'd burn you out. Caleb's breathing grew more labored. Jackson's men helped me to the barn before they left. Said they'd send someone back for me once Clara and the baby were safe. Luke checked the wound again, noting the pallor spreading beneath Caleb's weathered tan. Blood loss and shock were taking their toll. We need to get you to Dr. Lang. Too late for that, son. Caleb's voice had softened, resignation replacing pain. I've had bullets in me before. Know when one's got my name on it. Don't talk like that. You're coming with me to Thieves Valley. Ain't it gonna make that ride? Caleb gripped Luke's arm with surprising strength. Listen to me. Harmon knows you've escaped. He'll throw everything at finding you, stopping you from reaching the governor. I have proof now. Lang's test results, Clara's documents, enough to bring him down. Then go. Now, don't waste time on a dying old man. Luke shook his head stubbornly. I'm not leaving you. Damn it, Luke. Caleb's voice found its old command tone. Mary's dead. Your home's gone. All you have left is that little girl and the chance to get justice. Don't throw it away on sentiment. The harsh truth struck Luke like physical blow. Caleb was right, and Hope needed him more than the old soldier did. There's morphine in Lang's bag, he said finally. Let me at least make you comfortable. Caleb nodded gratefully. Then you'll go? Then I'll go. Luke administered the painkiller, watching as relief softened the lines of agony in his friend's face. He arranged water, ammunition from the barn store, and what little food remained within Caleb's reach. Jackson will send someone, Luke assured him. Hold on until then. Caleb's eyes had grown distant, the morphine taking effect. You're a good man, Luke Mallory. Better than most I've known. His hand found Luke's, squeezing weakly. Do what needs doing. For all of us. It felt like another burial as Luke left the barn, another piece of his life left behind. First Mary, then his home, now likely Caleb. How much could one man lose before breaking? He found an unharmed horse in the far pasture, a sturdy bay gelding that had evidently fled during the attack. The animal approached cautiously, nickering recognition. Good boy, Luke murmured, checking for injuries before improvising a bridle from rope stored in the barn. With no saddle available, he'd ride bareback, uncomfortable but necessary. As he prepared to depart, a movement near the still smoldering cabin caught his attention. A rider approached slowly, rifle balanced across his saddle, one of Harmon's men likely checking whether the fire had done its work. Luke slipped into the barn, retrieving Caleb's shotgun. The old soldier had loaded both barrels before being wounded, the weapon propped within reach for a final stand if needed. Company, Luke whispered to Caleb, who stirred slightly but didn't fully wake. From the barn doorway, Luke watched the rider circle the cabin ruins, then dismount to examine the blood trail leading to the barn. Mid-40s, bearded, wearing a deputy's badge, Luke recognized him as one of Mills's regular deputies, more professional than the young man he'd overpowered in the jail. The deputy drew his revolver, approaching the barn with appropriate caution. Anyone in there come out with your hands visible? Luke weighed his options. He could ambush the man easily enough, but killing a legitimate deputy would only worsen his situation. Yet surrender meant certain death. The deputy paused, listening at the door. I know someone's in there, last chance to come out peacefully. Luke made his decision. As the door began to swing open, he stepped forward, shotgun leveled. Drop the gun. The deputy froze, weapon half raised. Mallory, should have known you'd come back here. Drop it, Luke repeated. I don't want to kill you, but I will. You're making a mistake. Despite his precarious position, the deputy's voice remained calm. Harmon's got 20 men searching for you. You can't outrun them all. I don't need to outrun them all. Just you. Luke gestured with the shotgun. Gun, ground, now. Reluctantly, the deputy complied. What now? You planning to shoot an officer of the law? Planning to tie you up until I'm well away from here? Luke kept the shotgun trained as he retrieved the deputy's weapon. How many men at the ranch? Just me, checking for survivors. The deputy's eyes narrowed. Where's the old man and the woman and baby? Safe, Luke answered, simply gesturing the deputy inside the barn. Hands behind your back. As Luke secured the man with rope from the barn supplies, a groan from Caleb caught the deputy's attention. He needs a doctor, the lawman observed. Won't last the night without help. Worried about his welfare now, after your friend shot him. Wasn't me, the deputy protested. I was organizing search parties in town when that happened. Sheriff sent Wilson and his boys here, hothead cowboys playing at being lawmen. Luke considered this. The deputy seemed different from Harmon's usual followers, older, steadier, with the bearing of a professional. You believe I killed Jeremy Harmon? Luke asked suddenly. The deputy hesitated. Official report says you did. That's not what I asked. Another pause. Been lawman 20 years. Seen evidence manufactured before. Timing's too convenient. This surprising admission confirmed Luke's instinct. What's your name? Ezra Parker. Well, Deputy Parker, I didn't kill Jeremy Harmon, but I know who did and why his body ended up on my land. Parker's expression remained neutral. That's so. Judge Harmon reported his son killed at Antietam for the insurance money, then kept him hidden for years before he actually died. Recently, Harmon had the body moved to my property to frame me all to get my land for the railroad. That's quite a story. It's the truth. Same truth behind Mary's death, poisoned to pressure me into selling. Parker's eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. Your wife died in childbirth. Dr. Lang confirmed it. Lang confirmed no such thing. Luke retrieved the doctor's test results from his coat. Here's proof the well water was poisoned with arsenic. Mary's journal documents the symptoms. 5 other ranchers died similarly after refusing to sell to Northern Pacific. Despite his bound position, Parker leaned forward to examine the papers. That's Lang's signature, all right. He looked up at Luke. Why are you telling me this? Because you're not one of Harmon's creatures. Not completely. Luke finished tying the restraints. And because someone needs to know the truth if I don't make it to the governor. The deputy digested this in silence while Luke gathered final supplies. Where will you go? Parker asked finally. Better you don't know. Luke checked Caleb once more, relieved to find the old soldier sleeping peacefully under morphine's influence. He needs medical attention. Once I'm gone, you can work yourself free in an hour or so. Harmon will kill me if he thinks I helped you. Then don't tell him I was here. Say you found Caleb wounded, checked the property, and got ambushed by persons unknown. Parker nodded slowly. Might work, might not. It's the best I can offer. Luke paused at the door. One more thing. If something happens to me, find Clara Bellwright. She has all the evidence against Harmon. Make sure it reaches the territorial governor. Why would I risk that? Because you're still a lawman, not just Harmon's puppet. Luke's gaze hardened. And because 6 people are dead, including my wife, for nothing but greed. Something shifted in Parker's expression, a decision reached after long internal debate. Thieves Valley, he said quietly. That's where you're headed. To Jackson's settlement. Luke neither confirmed nor denied it. Harmon's men won't go there directly, Parker continued. Too many guns, but they'll watch the approaches. Your best chance is the old trapper's trail through Bear Canyon. Adds half a day to the journey, but it's rarely used in winter. The unexpected advice caught Luke off guard. Why help me? Been having my own doubts about Harmon lately. Parker shifted uncomfortably against his bonds. Too many convenient deaths, too many rushed inquests. Luke nodded a silent acknowledgement between men who still believed in justice, however imperfect. Bear Canyon, he repeated. I'm obliged. Outside, Luke mounted the bay gelding, orienting himself toward the northern ridgeline. Thieves Valley lay beyond a 2-day ride under normal circumstances. In winter, with Harmon's men hunting him, perhaps longer. He cast one final glance at the smoldering ruins of his home, the house he'd built for Mary, the future they'd planned together. Nothing remained but charred timbers and ash memories consumed by flame. Yet something unexpected stirred beneath his grief, a fierce determination that transcended personal loss. Mary was gone, but hope lived. His home was destroyed, but justice remained possible. The man who'd buried his gun, believing violence behind him, now rode toward an inevitable confrontation, clear-eyed and resolute. As Luke urged the horse upslope, snow began falling gentle at first, then thickening into swirling sheets that obscured visibility beyond 20 yards. Perfect cover for escape, but also deadly for a rider without proper supplies facing a mountain crossing. He pulled his inadequate coat tighter, remembering Mary's voice reading from her Bible on winter evenings. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. The whisper he heard now was anything but gentle. It was Mary's voice, Clara's determination, hope's future, demanding the same thing, justice, no matter the cost. Luke Mallory rode into the storm, one man against the elements, against corruption, against despair itself. Behind him, his past burned to ash. Before him lay an uncertain path to Thieves Valley, to Clara and Hope, to the confrontation that would determine all their fates. The snow erased his tracks almost immediately, the white silence swallowing any sound of pursuit. Within minutes, he had vanished into the gathering blizzard like a ghost, a man with nothing left to lose and everything still to fight for. Clara Bellwright cradled Hope against her chest, the infant surprisingly quiet despite the harrowing journey. Perhaps children sensed more than adults credited danger, urgency, the need for silence. "How much farther?" she asked Jackson, who rode slightly ahead, his dark face barely visible beneath his hat brim. "Another hour, weather permitting." The former sergeant scanned the ridgeline with practiced eyes. "Storm's coming, though. Might slow us down." Around them, Jackson's men maintained a protective formation, 7 veterans of the 54th Massachusetts men who had faced Confederate cannon at Fort Wagner and survived. Men who had carved out a precarious freedom in Montana's wilderness after discovering that peace hadn't changed Southern attitudes. "Will Luke know to find us there?" Clara pressed, adjusting Hope's blankets against the increasing cold. If Caleb told him yes. Jackson's expression revealed nothing. Question is whether he's free to follow. The unspoken possibility hung between them that Luke remained in Harmon's custody or worse. Clara pushed the thought aside, focusing on the immediate need to keep Hope safe. "Tell me about Thieves Valley," she said, seeking distraction. "Why that name?" Jackson almost smiled. "White folks named it. Said only thieves and outlaws would live in such a godforsaken place." The pride in his voice was unmistakable. "Turns out it's perfect for those the law won't protect. Good water, defensible, approaches hidden gardens in summer. And Harmon leaves you alone. Tried his intimidation once about 2 years back. Sent 6 men to collect taxes." Jackson's teeth flashed white against his dark beard. They didn't return. Harmon got the message. Clara studied the former officer with new appreciation. In another life, another time, men like Jackson might have been governors or senators. Instead, they carved existence from hostile wilderness, creating their own justice where society offered none. "You fought with Luke?" she asked. Jackson nodded. 3 years. Antietam to Appomattox. He was a good officer, treated colored troops same as white. Rare quality then. "And Jeremy Harmon, did you know him?" The question brought Jackson's sharp gaze to her face. "Why ask about him?" "Luke's been charged with his murder. Supposedly killed him at Antietam, then buried him on the ranch years later." Jackson's horse stopped abruptly. "That's impossible." "Why come?" "Because Jeremy Harmon wasn't at Antietam. He served with Mississippi 13th. They were at Sharpsburg, opposite end of the battlefield from our position." Clara's mind raced with implications. "You're certain?" "Captured their unit flag myself. Remember every regiment we faced." Jackson's expression darkened. "More importantly, Jeremy Harmon was taken prisoner that day by federal troops alive. Then how could Luke be accused of killing him?" "He couldn't have. Not then, not there." Jackson urged his horse forward again. "Sounds like someone's constructing an elaborate lie." "But why move the body to Luke's property now? Why not simply claim Luke killed him recently?" Jackson considered this. "War crimes carry special weight. Killing a wounded enemy, executing a prisoner. Even years later, such accusations can bypass normal legal procedures. Allowing Harmon to control the entire process," Clara concluded. "The accusation, the evidence, the judgment." "Precisely." The pieces aligned with sickening clarity. "We need to get this information to the territorial governor immediately." "First we reach Thieves Valley," Jackson countered pragmatically. "Keep you and the child safe. Then worry about governors and justice." As if punctuating his words, the storm Clara had been watching over the ridgeline descended upon them, visibility dropping to near zero within minutes. The temperature plummeted as wind drove snow horizontally across the trail. "We need shelter," Jackson shouted over the howling gale. "Can't reach the valley in this." He gestured toward a rocky outcropping, barely visible through the whiteout. "Old trapper's cabin nearby. We'll weather it there." Clara clutched Hope tighter, feeling the infant shiver despite her layers of protection. The cold bit through Clara's own clothing, numbing fingers and toes with frightening speed. Mountain blizzards killed indiscriminately. The strongest man could perish within hours out of caught unprepared. Even their well-equipped party faced danger if the storm maintained its ferocity overnight. As they struggled toward the promise of shelter, Clara found her thoughts returning to Luke alone, hunted, possibly injured. If he'd escaped Harmon's jail, he would try to reach them, storm or no storm. The image of him lost in this white fury, searching desperately for his daughter, brought tears that froze instantly on her cheeks. "Please be alive," she whispered into the howling wind. "We need you. I need you." Hope squirmed against her as if sensing her distress. The tiny movement, this fragile life depending entirely on her protection, strengthened Clara's resolve. They would survive this storm. They would reach Thieves' Valley. And somehow, against all odds, Luke would find them. He had to. Justice demanded it. Love demanded it. The alternative was unthinkable. The blizzard transformed the Montana wilderness into an unforgiving white void. Luke hunched low over his horse's neck, the animal plodding doggedly through snow that reached past its knees. The temperature had plummeted with nightfall, transforming each exhaled breath into crystalline fog that froze in his beard. Bear Canyon lay somewhere ahead, a narrow passage through the northern ridge that would eventually lead to Thieves' Valley. In clear weather, he could have navigated by landmarks. Now in swirling white blindness, he relied on instinct and the horse's surer senses. "Come on, boy," he murmured, patting the gelding's frost-rimmed neck. "Find us shelter." As if understanding, the horse altered course, slightly angling toward a dark smudge barely visible through the snow curtain. The vague shape solidified into a rock outcropping, and beneath it, the blessed outline of a crude lean-to, one of the hunter's shelters that dotted these mountains. Luke dismounted stiffly, legs nearly buckling as frozen muscles protested. The meager shelter offered little protection, but even this windbreak might mean survival through the night. He led the horse beneath the overhang, creating a wall of animal warmth on one side. With numb fingers, Luke gathered what sparse firewood remained in the shelter. Not enough for the night, but perhaps enough to thaw his extremities and melt snow for water. The deputy's revolver offered a dry primer, and soon a small flame sputtered to life. As blood painfully returned to his fingers and toes, Luke assessed his situation with soldier's pragmatism. The storm showed no signs of abating. Without better shelter by morning, his chances diminished sharply. The horse provided some warmth, but couldn't endure indefinitely without fodder. His own body, depleted by imprisonment and escape, demanded rest and sustenance. Yet stopping meant death, not just his own, but the death of justice for Mary. The abandonment of Hope and Clara to Harmon's machinations. Luke fed the last branch to his pitiful fire, watching sparks spiral into darkness. From his coat, he withdrew Mary's journal and Lang's test results, carefully protected inside oilskin. These precious documents represented his only hope against Harmon, proof of murder, of conspiracy of elaborate frame. "I'm coming," he whispered, as if Clara and Hope might somehow hear across the frozen miles. "Hold on." The fire dwindled to embers. Luke pressed against the horse's flank, sharing what warmth remained between man and beast. Sleep came in dangerous fragments, each awakening more difficult than the last, as cold seeped deeper into his bones. Dreams and reality blurred Mary's face, shifting to Clara Barnes, Hope's cry merging with the wind's howl. Once he startled, fully awake, certain someone had called his name. The third time consciousness slipped away, Luke wasn't sure he would return. "He's alive. Barely." The voice penetrated Luke's darkness, unfamiliar, gruff, neither hostile nor particularly friendly. Rough hands moved across his body, checking for injuries, slapping feeling back into limbs. Luke fought to open frost-sealed eyelids. "Lucky we found him," another voice observed. "Another hour, he'd be frozen solid." Luke managed to crack his eyes open. Two men knelt beside him, bearded, buckskin-clad, their weathered faces suggesting long acquaintance with mountain winters. Behind them, the lean-to's opening revealed continuing snowfall, though less violent than before. "Water," Luke croaked. One man held a canteen to his lips. The liquid burned his throat, not water but whiskey, harsh but gloriously warming. "Easy," the man cautioned. "Too much will kill you faster than the cold." Luke struggled to sit upright. "My horse, already loaded on the travois. Poor beast is nearly done in." "Who are you?" Luke managed his mind clearing slightly. "Trappers," the first man answered simply. "Caught the storm same as you. Saw your fire smoke." He studied Luke with narrowed eyes. "You're Mallory, ain't you, the one they're hunting?" Luke tensed hand instinctively seeking the deputy's revolver gone from his holster. Looking for this, the second trapper held up the weapon. Don't blame you for reaching. Man in your position can't be too careful. Are you taking me in, Mom? Luke asked bluntly. The men exchanged glances. Depends, the first one replied. Heard you killed Judge Harmon's boy during the war. That true? No, it's a lie to steal my land. Figured as much. The trapper returned the revolver butt first. Harmon's not popular in these mountains. Man claims too much, pays too little. Luke accepted the weapon gratefully. I need to reach Thieves Valley. My daughter's there, and a woman. With Jackson's people, the second trapper whistled low. That's another day's travel in this weather. You'd never make it alone. I don't have a choice. Maybe you do. The first trapper gestured outside. We're headed to our winter cabin, 5 miles east. Storms easing by morning, you could reach the valley by nightfall tomorrow. The offer of shelter warred with Luke's urgency to reach Hope and Clara, but logic prevailed. He was no use to them, dead from exposure. I'm obliged, he said finally. Name's Hatcher, the first trapper introduced himself. This here's Boone. Been working these mountains 20 years. Luke Mallory. We know, Boone grunted. Whole territory knows by now. Harmon's offering $200 for you, dead or alive. The price surprised Luke's substantial money in frontier economy. Must want you awful bad, Hatcher observed, helping Luke to his feet. What did you really do to rile him? Found silver, refused to sell, and my wife discovered his secrets before she died. Hatcher nodded as if this explained everything. Sounds like Harmon. Man's been squeezing these parts dry for years, taking land, claiming water rights, running off homesteaders. You seem well informed for trappers, Luke noted cautiously. Boone chuckled. Mountains have ears, Mallory, and trappers go places lawmen don't. We hear things. Like what? Like Jeremy Harmon didn't die in no war, Hatcher answered. Came back broken. Judge kept him hidden up at the hunting lodge for years. This confirmation of Lang's account heightened Luke's interest. Did you ever see him once or twice from a distance? Hatcher helped Luke onto a crude travois hitched to a sturdy mountain pony. Poor devil was half mad, screaming some nights so loud you could hear him a mile off. When did he die? Luke pressed. 3, maybe 4 years back, Boone offered. Buried him on Harmon property. Private-like. Then how did his body end up on my land? The trappers exchanged significant glances. That, Hatcher said slowly, is the real question, ain't it? They set off through diminishing snowfall, the trappers hiking efficiently while Luke rode the travois, his horse trailing behind. The movement gradually restored circulation to his extremities, though painful pins and needles accompanied returning sensation. You mentioned Jackson's people, Luke said, after they'd traveled some distance. You know Thomas Jackson, know of him, Hatcher replied. Man's built himself quite a settlement up in Thieves Valley. Mostly colored veterans, some Mexican families, few white renegades, says. Folks the law doesn't protect. Harmon leaves them alone, Boone snorted. After losing 6 men trying to collect taxes, even Harmon learned that lesson. This matched what Parker had told him. Thieves Valley stood outside Harmon's reach, protected by geography and well-armed defenders who had nothing to lose. If Clara and Hope had reached Jackson's settlement, they would be safer than anywhere else in the territory. How well defended is the valley? Luke asked. Single trail and easily guarded, Hatcher described. Natural walls too steep to climb. Good water source inside. 20-30 cabins last I saw, maybe 100 people total. Could Harmon's men take it by force? Not without casualties they can't explain, Boone opined. One thing shooting homesteaders who resist arrest, another thing attacking war veterans who know how to fight back. The knowledge eased one of Luke's immediate concerns. Even if he couldn't reach the valley immediately, Clara and Hope weren't defenseless. Jackson and his men would protect them. Now his greater worry was reaching the territorial governor with evidence of Harmon's crimes, a journey made infinitely more difficult by winter conditions and the price on his head. By the time they reached the trapper's cabin, night had fully descended. The structure proved surprisingly substantial, a 2-room log building with stone fireplace and well-chinked walls. Soon a robust fire dispelled the crippling cold while Hatcher prepared a meal of beans, salt pork, and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon upright. Luke ate gratefully, feeling strength return with each bite. His horse had been stabled in a lean-to with the trapper's ponies given precious oats from limited supplies. "Why are you helping me?" he asked finally, the question that had nagged since their rescue. "The reward money would set you up nicely." Hatcher scratched his grizzled beard. "Money's tempting, sure, but some things matter more." "Like what?" "Justice," Boone interjected. "Been watching Harmon destroy lives for years. Taking land from folks who worked it honest. Hanging men whose only crime was standing in his way. Even claiming water rights on streams that been free-flowing since creation," Hatcher added bitterly. "Man strangling the territory for railroad money." Luke recognized the genuine outrage. These weren't just good Samaritans, but men with personal grievances against Harmon's regime. "I have evidence," Luke told them. "Proof of poisoning, land fraud, falsified death reports. Enough to bring Harmon down if I can reach the territorial governor." The trappers exchanged meaningful glances. "Helena's a long ride in winter," Hatcher observed, "especially with every hired gun in 3 counties hunting you." "I have to try. For my wife, for my daughter." Boone leaned forward. "Might be another way. Telegraph office in Benton Springs. Operator there, Sam Griffin, no friend of Harmon's." "That's still a day's ride east," Hatcher cautioned, "and you'd be going opposite from Thieves Valley." The dilemma crystallized in stark relief. Luke could head west to Hope and Clara, ensuring their immediate safety, but potentially losing his chance at justice. Or east to the Telegraph, risking never seeing his daughter again if something went wrong. The choice tore at him like physical pain. "I need to reach my daughter first," he decided finally. "Make sure she's truly safe. Then pursue Harmon." Hatcher nodded approvingly. "Family first. Wise choice." "We'll get you to Thieves Valley," Boone promised. "Know a route Harmon's men won't watch. Can reach it by tomorrow night if the weather holds." For the first time in days, Luke felt genuine hope flicker. With allies, however unexpected, his chances improved significantly. "I'm in your debt," he told the trapper sincerely. "No debt between enemies of Harmon." Hatcher dismissed. "Man's been choking this territory long enough." About time, someone cut the noose. Dawn brought clearing skies and bitter cold. The storm had passed, leaving pristine snow blanket across the landscape. Under different circumstances, Luke might have appreciated the savage beauty, sunlight transforming endless white into diamond brilliance forests, standing stark against azure sky. Now he registered only strategic considerations. Improved visibility meant easier travel but also greater exposure to pursuers. Clear weather would allow Harmon to expand his search grid, perhaps even send riders toward Thieves Valley if he suspected Clara's destination. The trappers equipped Luke with essential survival gear, snowshoes, additional ammunition, pemmican rations. His horse, rested but still weakened, could manage the journey if not pushed too hard. "Stay along this ridge," Hatcher instructed, marking a crude map drawn in the snow. "When you reach the split pine, can't miss it. Lightning struck it years back. Drop into the valley below. Follow the frozen creek bed west. It'll bring you to Thieves Valley back way." "Harmon's men won't know that approach," Luke questioned. "They're town men, not mountain men." Boone snorted dismissively. "Stick to main trails, known routes. This way's harder, but safer." Luke mounted his gelding, testing the animal's strength. The horse responded adequately, if without enthusiasm. "One more thing," Hatcher added, handing Luke a folded paper. "Found this in Benton Springs last month. Might interest you." Luke unfolded the document, a wanted poster with a crude likeness of a bearded man. The text proclaimed, $500 reward for information leading to the capture of Jeremy Harmon, wanted for the murder of Eleanor Harmon, October 1868. "Eleanor Harmon?" Luke questioned, studying the poster. "Judge's second wife," Boone explained. "Married her about a year after Jeremy came home broken. She disappeared suddenly. Judge claims she returned east to family." Boone, "But this suggests Jeremy killed her." "Posters from Wyoming territory," Hatcher noted. "Outside Harmon's jurisdiction. Interesting, ain't it?" The implications staggered Luke. If Jeremy had murdered his stepmother and Judge Harmon had covered it up, this changes everything, Luke realized. Jeremy wasn't just hidden because of insurance fraud. He was a fugitive. "Seems likely," Hatcher agreed. "Question remains, why frame you for his death now?" After all these years, Luke carefully pocketed the poster alongside Mary's journal and Lang's test results. "I intend to find out and make Harmon answer for all of it." The trappers accompanied him to the ridge trail before turning back, declining Luke's offers of future payment or assistance. "Just get Harmon," was Boone's parting request. "Man's destroyed enough lives." Luke rode west along the ridge, making good time on the wind-packed snow. By mid-morning, he'd covered several miles, periodically scanning the valleys below for pursuit. So far, nothing disturbed the pristine landscape. The split pine appeared shortly after noon, an ancient giant shattered by lightning, its blackened trunk split perfectly down the middle, yet somehow still alive. One half reached skyward, the other bent at precarious angle toward the valley floor. Luke began the descent, dismounting to lead his horse down the treacherous slope. Snowshoes provided crucial stability as he navigated between ice-slick boulders and concealed deadfall. Reaching the valley floor brought both relief and new caution. The frozen creek bed offered easier travel, but less cover. Luke remounted, urging the gelding to a sustainable trot westward. An hour later, a sound stopped him, cold horse's hooves on packed snow approaching from ahead. Luke quickly guided his mount into dense pine cover, dismounting to better control the animal. Through gaps in the evergreen branches, he observed the creek bed he'd just vacated. 3 riders appeared moving eastward, Harmon's men by their town clothes and carbines. They rode confidently, clearly following a trail. Luke's trail. His stomach sank. Somehow they'd anticipated his route or spotted his tracks further upstream. Either way, discovery seemed inevitable once they backtracked to his position. Luke checked the deputy's revolver, 5 rounds remaining. Not enough for 3 armed men, especially when he couldn't risk a protracted gunfight that might draw others. The riders halted precisely where Luke had left the creek bed. One dismounted, examining the snow carefully before pointing toward Luke's hiding place. "Tracks lead north," the man called to his companions. "Recent, maybe an hour old." "He's heading for Thieves Valley, then," another concluded, just like Harmon figured. "We can't follow him in there," the third objected. "Jackson's people would cut us to pieces." "Don't need to," the tracker replied. "Just confirm he's going there. Then we ride back, tell Harmon. He's got something special planned for Mallory and those colored soldiers." The ominous statement chilled Luke more than the winter air. What could Harmon possibly have planned for an armed settlement of combat veterans? The riders conferred briefly before continuing east, apparently satisfied with merely confirming his direction rather than immediate capture. Their confidence suggested larger forces nearby, perhaps waiting in ambush along the main trail to Thieves Valley. Luke remained hidden until the riders disappeared from sight and sound. The encounter had revealed both danger and opportunity. Danger in Harmon's apparent anticipation of his movements. Opportunity in the men's evident reluctance to pursue him directly to Jackson's settlement. Once certain of safety, Luke remounted and continued westward, now moving with heightened caution. The afternoon waned, shadows lengthening across virgin snow as the winter sun declined toward mountain peaks. According to the trappers, he should reach Thieves Valley by nightfall, perhaps 2 hours more travel. The prospect of reuniting with Hope and Clara drove him forward despite growing exhaustion and his horse's laboring breath. Just before dusk, Luke spotted smoke rising from beyond the next ridgeline, multiple plumes suggesting a settlement. Thieves Valley lay just ahead, its location betrayed only by cooking fires in the frigid evening air. Relief surged through him immediately, tempered by the tracker's ominous words. Harmon had something special planned. Whatever threat that implied, Luke needed to warn Jackson immediately. He urged his tired mount up the final slope, cresting the ridge as last daylight faded from the sky. Below Thieves Valley spread in protected basin, a scattered collection of cabins and larger communal structures, surrounded by formidable natural walls on 3 sides. A single trail provided access through the eastern approach, currently guarded by men with rifles clearly visible, even at this distance. Luke had reached his destination, but not as he'd intended. The tracker's revelation meant Harmon knew exactly where to find him, Clara and Hope. The sanctuary below might soon become a trap. As darkness settled fully, Luke began the descent toward the guarded entrance. Before he'd covered half the distance, sharp commands rang out. "Halt! Identify yourself!" Hidden riflemen had spotted his approach. Luke raised his hand, slowly, aware that veteran sharpshooters likely had him in their sights. "Luke Mallory," he called clearly. "I'm expected. Clara Bellwright and my daughter are here." Tense silence followed before a familiar voice responded. "Let him approach." Slowly. Jackson himself stood at the trail entrance, Springfield rifle held ready. Behind him, two other men maintained covering positions, their expressions revealing neither welcome nor hostility. Luke dismounted, leading his exhausted horse the final yards. "You made it," Jackson observed, lowering his weapon slightly. "Wasn't certain you would." "Neither was I," Luke admitted. "Harmon's men are everywhere. 3 tracked me within a few miles of here." Jackson nodded grimly. "We've spotted several patrols, keeping their distance so far, but watching." "Where are Clara and Hope?" Luke asked the question that had driven him through impossible conditions. "Safe, cabin near the center." Jackson gestured for one of his men to take Luke's horse. "Clara's been worried sick about you, convinced you'd try to reach us despite the storm." She was right. Luke followed Jackson through the settlement entrance, noting the substantial fortifications, sharpened stakes, firing positions, even primitive alarm systems of tin cans on wires. "Your people know how to secure a perimeter. War taught us that much, at least." Jackson's tone held no bitterness, merely pragmatic acceptance. "Most here fought at Missionary Ridge, Vicksburg, Nashville. Some at Fort Wagner with the 54th Massachusetts." The settlement interior revealed surprising sophistication, 30-some structures arranged in concentric circles around a central commons. Gardens lay dormant under snow, but livestock pens contained goats and chickens. Children played near cabin doorways, despite the late hour, their laughter a surreal counterpoint to the armed men patrolling the perimeter. "You've built something remarkable," Luke observed. "Had to," Jackson replied simply. "World outside didn't want us, so we made our own." They approached a sturdy cabin near the settlement center. Light glowed from its windows, smoke curling from the stone chimney. "She's here," Jackson indicated. "Been tending your daughter like her own. Strong woman." Luke paused at the door, suddenly uncertain. The last time he'd seen Clara, they'd been desperate strangers thrown together by circumstance. Now she'd protected his child through danger and storm, while he'd failed to prevent their separation. What right did he have to claim either of them? Jackson seemed to read his hesitation. "Family's family, Captain. However it comes together." The simple wisdom steadied Luke. He knocked softly. Footsteps approached from within. The door swung open, and there stood Clara, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders, eyes widening in disbelief. "Luke," she whispered, as if fearing he might be apparition. "It's me," he confirmed, voice rough with emotion. She flew into his arms with unexpected force, nearly knocking him backward. Luke held her tightly, the warmth of another human being. This human being suddenly the most precious sensation imaginable. "You're alive," Clara breathed against his chest. "They said you might not make it through the storm. Takes more than weather to stop me." Luke managed, though in truth, without the trapper's intervention, the blizzard would indeed have claimed him. Clara pulled back, examining him with journalist's thoroughness. "You're injured, Harmon's men." "I'm fine, just tired." Luke glanced past her anxiously. "Hope?" Clara's face softened. "Sleeping. She's been so good, Luke. So strong like her father." She led him inside, where warmth from the hearth immediately enveloped him. The cabin interior was simple but comfortable wooden furniture, woven rugs, walls adorned with pressed flowers and hand-carved decorations. And there, in a wooden cradle near the fire, lay Hope, peaceful in sleep, one tiny fist curled beside her face. Luke approached silently, drinking in the sight of his daughter. She seemed bigger already, her features more defined, less the fragile newborn, and more a little person. "She's thriving," Clara said softly beside him. "Jackson's people have been wonderful. There's a woman here who recently weaned her own baby. She's been helping with feeding." Luke knelt beside the cradle, gently touching Hope's perfect fingers. "Thank you," he whispered to Clara, to whatever fate had preserved his child through these trials, "for keeping her safe." "She kept me going," Clara admitted. "When the storm hit, when we weren't sure we'd make it here, her strength gave me strength." Luke stood, turning to face Clara properly. In the firelight, he truly saw her, not the professional journalist, not the desperate ally, but the woman who had risked everything for his family. Her eyes held the same direct intelligence he'd first noticed, but now warmth and something deeper shone there too. "I need to tell you what I've learned," he said, reluctantly breaking the moment. "About Jeremy Harmon. About what Harmon's planning." Clara's expression shifted to alert focus. "What is it?" "First, Jeremy couldn't have died at Antietam as the charges claim. Jackson confirmed his unit was nowhere near my position." "I know," Clara nodded. Jackson told me the same. He also said Jeremy was taken prisoner alive. More than that, Luke continued withdrawing the wanted poster. Jeremy apparently murdered his stepmother years after returning from the war. Harmon covered it up. Claire examined the poster, professional instincts visibly engaged. This explains so much. Why Harmon kept Jeremy hidden, why he manufactured the death report. And possibly why he's framing me now, Luke added. If Jeremy's crimes became public, Harmon's complicity would be exposed. But why you specifically? Why your land? The silver deposit and railroad route are valuable enough, Luke reasoned. But perhaps there's more. Something connecting Jeremy to our property specifically. Clara considered this. The timing aligns with when you discovered silver. Maybe Jeremy knew something about that land, something that makes it particularly valuable. A knock interrupted their speculation. Jackson entered without waiting for response, his expression grave. Problems, he announced without preamble. Scouts report large force gathering at Benton Springs, 30 men at least with wagons. Harmon's men, Luke asked. Some local deputies, others look like hired guns. Jackson's jaw tightened. And something else. They're unloading what looks like artillery. Artillery, Clara echoed incredulously, for a civilian settlement. Mountain howitzer, small but effective. Jackson's expression remained stoic, but concern shadowed his eyes. They're bringing a cannon against us, Mallory. This isn't just about capturing you anymore. The implications struck like physical blow. Harmon wasn't planning mere arrest or even assassination. He was mobilizing for assault on an entire community, dozens of innocent people, including women and children. He's insane, Luke breathed. A military attack would bring federal intervention investigations. Not if he calls it law enforcement against armed fugitives, Clara countered grimly. Remember, officially, you're an escaped murderer. I'm harboring you. Jackson's people are interfering with justice. And a black settlement has few defenders in territorial politics, Jackson added with bitter pragmatism. Harmon could claim we fired first. Who would contradict him? The something special Harmon's tracker mentioned now revealed itself in horrifying clarity. Not just elimination of witnesses and recovery of valuable land, but eradication of an independent black community that had defied his authority for years. How much time do we have? Luke demanded. They're still organizing. Moving a cannon through mountain snow takes time. Jackson calculated visibly. 2 days, maybe 3, before they could reach striking distance. Can your people evacuate, disperse temporarily? Jackson shook his head. 30 families, elderly, children, nowhere to go in winter. And Harmon would simply hunt us individually. Then we fight, Luke concluded grimly, defend the settlement. Against artillery, Clara objected. Even with good fortifications, that howitzer would eventually breach any defense. Luke paced the small cabin military mind, assessing impossible options. Fighting meant casualties, perhaps total destruction. Surrender meant execution for him, uncertain fate for Clara and Harmon's continued reign of terror. A third option crystallized, desperate, dangerous, but potentially effective. We need to split Harmon's forces, he proposed. Draw them away from the settlement. How? Jackson asked. Me. I'm what Harmon wants most. Luke's voice hardened with resolve. If I'm spotted heading east toward the telegraph at Benton Springs, he'd have to divide his men. Send some after me, leave others to continue preparations. That's suicide, Clara protested. They'd hunt you down before you reach the telegraph. Not if I have help, Luke turned to Jackson. Could your best riders create diversions? False trails confuse pursuit long enough for me to reach Benton Springs. Jackson considered this carefully. Possibly. My men know these mountains better than Harmon's townsmen. It's too dangerous, Clara insisted. Even if you reach the telegraph, messages take time. The governor would need to organize response, dispatch federal marshals. We don't need the governor immediately, Luke countered. Just the threat of intervention. If the telegraph operator sends confirmation that evidence of Harmon's crimes has reached Helena, it might force Harmon to abandon his attack plans. The strategy wasn't perfect, but offered better odds than awaiting siege. I'll need copies of everything, Luke continued. Mary's journal, Lang's test results, the wanted poster. Anything that proves Harmon's crimes. Clara hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. I can help prepare those tonight. I'll select riders, Jackson decided. 3 of my best men. We'll create multiple false trails, draw pursuit in different directions. The plan took shape. Luke would depart before dawn, heading east toward Benton Springs, while Jackson's riders simultaneously created diversions north and south. If successful, the confusion might buy precious time for Luke to reach the telegraph and alert authorities. As Jackson left to make preparations, Clara turned to Luke, her expression torn between admiration and fear. "This is a fool's errand," she said softly. "You know that?" "I know the odds," Luke acknowledged, "but staying here condemns everyone to Harmon's artillery. At least this way some might survive." Clara stepped closer, her hand finding his. "And what about hope? What if you don't return?" The question struck his core, the possibility of never seeing his daughter grow up, of becoming just a story told to her about a father she couldn't remember. "If I don't make it," Luke said carefully, "I want you to take her east. Start fresh somewhere. Harmon can never reach you." "Don't ask that of me," Clara whispered, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Don't ask me to leave you behind." The raw emotion in her voice shattered something within Luke, the final barrier he'd maintained since Mary's death. Without conscious decision, he drew Clara into his arms, his lips finding hers with desperate certainty. She responded immediately, arms encircling his neck, as the kiss deepened into something neither had dared acknowledge until this moment needed longing, the recognition of something precious found amidst unbearable loss. When they finally parted, Luke rested his forehead against hers, breathing unsteady. "I never expected this," he confessed. "Never thought I could feel this way again." Clara admitted. "After Daniel died, I closed that part of myself away. Until you. Until Hope." They stood holding each other, the fire crackling beside them, Hope sleeping peacefully in her cradle. A moment of impossible perfection amid looming catastrophe. "I'm coming back," Luke promised, though they both recognized the hollow bravado. "For both of you." Clara nodded against his chest, unwilling to voice the fear they shared, that this brief connection might be all they ever had. That by morning the man she had somehow come to love would ride away to almost certain death. Outside, Jackson's preparations continued, hushed conversations, weapons checked, horses readied. Inside, Luke and Clara clung to each other, stealing what comfort they could from the night's brief sanctuary. Tomorrow would bring impossible choices, desperate gambles, perhaps final sacrifice. But tonight, just tonight, they allowed themselves to imagine a future beyond Harmon's shadow. A future where justice prevailed, where a family formed from tragedy might find lasting peace. A beautiful lie, perhaps, but one worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary. In her cradle, Hope stirred slightly, one tiny hand opening and closing as if reaching for something just beyond grasp. The gesture seemed prophetic, hope itself always tantalizingly close, yet never quite attained. By dawn, Luke would ride eastward, carrying not just evidence of crimes, but the weight of all their futures. The fragile chance for justice, the desperate prayer for survival. And behind him in a settlement preparing for siege, the two people who had somehow become his world would wait, caught between hope and despair, between possibility and resignation, between love and final loss. Dawn painted the eastern sky in watercolor shades of pink and gold, the bitter cold crystallizing each breath into ghostly vapor. Luke checked his gelding's saddle cinch one final time, the animal stamping restlessly, as if sensing the importance of their journey. Jackson stood nearby, reviewing last-minute details with 3 riders, his best men each tasked with creating false trails to confuse pursuit. "Michaels heads north toward Canadian border," the former sergeant confirmed. "Williams southwest to the mining camps. Davis directly south along the Ridge Trail, all leaving clear tracks for Harmon's men to follow." Luke nodded approval. "And I go east toward Benton Springs Telegraph. If the diversions work, I'll have several hours head start before they realize which trail is genuine." "Best case," Jackson qualified. "Worst case, they ignore the decoys entirely and concentrate on you." "Then I ride harder," Luke said simply. Clara approached from the cabin, Hope bundled against her chest in a makeshift sling. She had spent most of the night helping Luke organize evidence, copying key sections from Mary's journal, cataloging Lang's test results, creating a comprehensive document that could be transmitted via telegraph. Now she carried a final packet, which she handed to Luke without meeting his eyes. "I added a sworn statement about what I witnessed at the ranch," she said. and a formal request for federal intervention as a journalist. Luke tucked the papers carefully inside his coat. Thank you. The inadequacy of the words hung between them. How to properly thank someone who had saved your child, risked everything for your cause, and somehow awakened your heart from grief-stricken dormancy. Jackson tactfully stepped away, directing his men toward final preparations and giving Luke and Clara a moment of privacy. I should reach Benton Springs by nightfall, Luke said, filling the awkward silence. Telegraph message could be in the governor's hands by morning. Clara nodded mechanically. And if Harmon's men are already there, then I find another way. Luke's voice softened. I'm coming back, Clara, whatever it takes. She finally met his gaze, eyes suspiciously bright in the dawn light. Promise me you won't take unnecessary risks. Hope needs her father. The mention of his daughter triggered a tightness in Luke's chest. He gently touched the sleeping infant's cheek, marveling at the perfect softness. Take care of her, he whispered. If something happens, don't. Clara interrupted fiercely. Don't say it. Say. Instead of arguing, Luke drew her into a gentle embrace, mindful of hope between them. Against his chest, Clara's composure finally cracked, silent tears dampening his coat. I just found you, she murmured, voice breaking. Both of you. Luke tilted her face upward, wiping away tears with calloused thumb. And you'll keep us. This isn't goodbye, Clara. It's just until I return. The lie tasted bitter but necessary. They both understood the odds, one man against Harmon's assembled forces in winter conditions, carrying evidence that could destroy the most powerful man in the territory. Jackson approached reluctantly. Time, Captain. Need to move while tracks are still fresh. Luke nodded, allowing himself one final indulgence, a kiss to Clara's forehead, a gentle touch to Hope's downy head. No grand declarations or promises, just silent communion between three souls, unexpectedly bound together by circumstance and growing affection. 2 days, he said, finally mounting his horse. If you don't hear from me by then, he left the sentence unfinished. They all understood the implications. Jackson extended his hand, which Luke clasped firmly. Godspeed, Captain. We'll hold as long as possible. The four riders departed simultaneously, each taking separate trails from the settlement. Luke rode eastward back, straight eyes fixed on the horizon. He didn't allow himself to look back. Couldn't bear to see Clara standing in the snow holding his daughter, possibly for the last time. Behind him, Jackson's men were already implementing defensive preparations, reinforcing barricades, distributing weapons, preparing evacuation routes for women and children should the worst occur. The settlement had survived previous threats, but nothing like the artillery-backed force Harmon was assembling. Everything depended on Luke reaching Benton Springs and successfully transmitting his evidence to territorial authorities. A desperate gamble with impossible odds. But he had survived Antietam and Gettysburg, had endured Mary's death and built a new life in this harsh wilderness, had escaped Harmon's jail and navigated blizzard conditions to reach his daughter. One more impossible task wouldn't defeat him. Not with so much at stake. Luke urged his horse to greater speed as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, casting long shadows across pristine snow. Behind him, hoofprints marked his passage like an invitation to pursuit, clear tracks leading straight toward Benton Springs. Exactly as planned. Walter Thompson considered himself a reasonable businessman. 20 years with Northern Pacific Railroad had taught him that most problems had practical solutions, financial incentives for cooperation, legal maneuvering for resistance, occasional force for stubborn obstacles. But Judge Samuel Harmon had become a liability beyond reasonable management. Artillery, Thompson repeated incredulously, staring at the small mountain howitzer being positioned on a reinforced wagon. Against civilians, have you lost your mind? Harmon barely acknowledged the railroad executive's concern, continuing to direct men loading ammunition crates. These aren't civilians, the judge corrected coldly. They're armed insurrectionists harboring a fugitive murderer. The howitzer is merely insurance against fortifications. This is madness, Thompson hissed, grabbing Harmon's arm to force his attention. Northern Pacific cannot be associated with military action against American citizens. The political blowback would be catastrophic. Harmon finally turned, eyes narrowing dangerously. You wanted Mallory's land. I'm delivering it. Through legal means, reasonable pressure. Thompson gestured emphatically toward the gathering force, nearly 40 men, now a mix of deputies, hired guns, and local opportunists, attracted by Harmon's generous bounty. This is an army, Samuel. An illegal militia at best, a criminal enterprise at worst. It's justice. Harmon's voice dropped to dangerous whisper. Those colored soldiers have defied territorial authority for years. Mallory murdered my son. The Bellwright woman is spreading libelous accusations against officers of the court. All must be addressed. Thompson recognized the dangerous fanaticism in Harmon's expression, rationality subsumed by obsession. The judge had moved beyond pragmatic corruption into something more volatile. Northern Pacific is withdrawing support, Thompson declared firmly. I'm returning to Helena immediately to disavow any connection to this operation. Harmon's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm afraid that's impossible, Walter. Excuse me. Your signature appears on numerous documents authorizing land acquisitions through my court, documents that wouldn't withstand federal scrutiny. The implied threat froze Thompson mid-stride. You've been our man in Montana for years, Harmon continued conversationally. Directing payments, approving methods, celebrating results without asking uncomfortable questions. I never authorized violence, Thompson protested weakly. Your telegraph to headquarters last spring specifically requested more aggressive approach to land clearance after the Mitchell property proved difficult to acquire. Harmon's recall was disturbingly precise. Mitchell died 3 days later. How do you imagine that will appear to a federal prosecutor? Thompson paled visibly. You're blackmailing me. I prefer ensuring continued partnership, Harmon corrected smoothly. The operation proceeds with or without your moral reservations. Your choice is whether you face consequences alongside me or enjoy continued corporate success once obstacles are removed. The calculation took mere seconds. Thompson's principles, never particularly robust, crumbled before self-preservation. What do you need from me? He asked resignedly. Harmon's smile widened fractionally. Nothing complicated. Simply verify to any inquiries that Northern Pacific authorized appropriate law enforcement action against armed resistors, corporate resources backing legitimate territorial authority. And afterward, once this is resolved, Mallory's silver-rich property transfers to Northern Pacific at market rates. The railroad proceeds according to original plans. Territorial leadership continues supporting the expansion without federal interference. Harmon spread his hands magnanimously. Everyone profits, except those foolish enough to stand in progress's path. Before Thompson could respond, a rider approached at gallop, pulling his lathered horse to abrupt halt before Harmon. Report, the judge demanded. 4 riders left the nigger settlement at dawn. The man gasped, still catching his breath. Heading in different directions. One east toward Benton Springs, others north, south, and southwest. Harmon processed this information with narrowed eyes. Mallory splitting his forces, trying to confuse pursuit. Which one do we follow? Sheriff Mills asked, approaching from the makeshift command tent. All of them, Harmon decided instantly. Mills take 10 men after the eastbound rider, likely Mallory himself, heading for the telegraph. Wilson, your group pursues north. Parker southwest. Johnson due south. The men scrambled to obey, organizing into pursuit parties with practiced efficiency. And the settlement? Thompson inquired uneasily. Continues as planned, Harmon replied coldly. The howitzer and remaining men advance tomorrow at dawn. With luck, we'll catch Mallory before he reaches Benton Springs. But even if he temporarily escapes, his friends won't. Thompson shuddered involuntarily. Judge Samuel Harmon had transitioned from corrupt official to military commander with disturbing ease, orchestrating what amounted to small-scale warfare against American citizens with the calm precision of a man arranging dinner reservations. For the first time, Thompson questioned whether any land or mineral rights were worth this association. But the moment for moral stands had passed. Now he could only watch events unfold with growing dread, his own fate inextricably bound to Harmon's increasingly dangerous gambit. Luke pushed his horse hard through morning hours, covering ground rapidly on the wind-packed snow. The gelding performed admirably despite recent hardships, seeming to sense the urgency of their mission. By noon, he'd traveled nearly 15 miles following the most direct route to Benton Springs. Periodically, he scanned his back trail for pursuit, so far detecting nothing. Either Jackson's diversions were working or Harmon's forces hadn't yet mobilized. He paused briefly at a frozen stream, allowing his mount to rest while he consulted the crude map provided by the trappers. Benton Springs lay perhaps another 20 miles east, achievable by nightfall if conditions remained favorable. The telegraph operator there, Samuel Griffin, was apparently no friend of Harmon's. Luke hoped this reputation proved accurate. Everything depended on successfully transmitting his evidence to Helena. As Luke remounted, distant gunfire echoed across the valley, 3 shots in rapid succession, then silence. The sound came from southwest, perhaps 5 miles distant, one of Jackson's decoys engaging pursuers, creating the promised diversion. Luke urged his horse forward with renewed urgency. The gunfire confirmed Harmon's men were already in pursuit, though apparently following one of the false trails. This advantage wouldn't last long. Sooner or later, they'd realize the deception and concentrate on the eastern route. The afternoon brought deteriorating weather, not another blizzard, but increasing cloud cover and dropping temperature. Wind picked up from the northwest, driving needles of ice into exposed skin. Luke pulled his scarf higher, grateful for the additional clothing provided by Jackson's people. By mid-afternoon, he had crossed into unfamiliar territory, a region of steep ravines and narrow valleys leading toward Benton Springs. The trail became increasingly treacherous, forcing slower progress as his horse navigated icy slopes and concealed deadfall. Luke's military instincts registered the tactical disadvantage immediately. This terrain created perfect ambush conditions, limited visibility, constrained movement, few escape routes. If Harmon's men anticipated his destination, they could easily establish blocking positions ahead. The realization forced a difficult decision. Continuing on the direct route invited interception. Deviating meant delay, but possibly greater safety. Luke chose the latter, guiding his horse into a densely forested slope north of the main trail. Progress became painfully slow as they pushed through snow-laden undergrowth, but the forest provided concealment impossible on the exposed trail. His caution proved prescient. An hour later, approaching a ridgeline overlooking the main route, Luke spotted horsemen below, at least 8 riders moving rapidly eastward following his earlier tracks. Sheriff Mills himself led the group, distinctive hat visible even at this distance. Luke froze in position, barely breathing, as the pursuit party passed directly beneath his elevated position. Had any of them glanced upward, they might have spotted him against the snowy backdrop. Once the immediate danger passed, Luke continued eastward through the forest parallel to the main trail. This cross-country route added significant difficulty, but offered essential concealment. Mills and his men would reach the point where Luke had left the trail eventually, but the dense forest would make tracking nearly impossible. The detour cost precious daylight. As afternoon faded toward evening, Luke estimated he'd covered only half the remaining distance to Benton Springs. Reaching the telegraph office before nightfall now seemed impossible. Worse, his horse showed signs of exhaustion, labored breathing, stumbling gait, head drooping, despite Luke's encouragement. The animal had given everything pushed beyond reasonable endurance through days of hardship. "Just a little further, boy," Luke murmured, dismounting to lead the gelding through particularly difficult terrain. "We'll rest soon." The promise rang hollow even to his own ears. There could be no substantial rest, not with Mills' men between him and Benton Springs, not with Harmon's artillery threatening Thieves Valley, not with hope in Clara's safety hanging by increasingly frayed thread. As darkness descended, Luke was forced to make camp, a rudimentary shelter beneath dense pines, no fire despite the plummeting temperature. The risk of smoke detection outweighed the comfort of warmth. He shared the last of his pemmican with the horse, then huddled beneath borrowed blankets, periodically stamping his feet and swinging his arms to maintain circulation. Sleep came in fragments, constantly interrupted by environmental sounds that might indicate approaching danger. During one such wakeful period, distant thunder rolled across the mountains, except no storm clouds had been visible at sunset. Luke sat upright, listening intently as the sound repeated. Not thunder, artillery. Harmon had begun his assault on Thieves Valley. The realization struck like physical blow. Luke had hoped, perhaps naively, that reaching the telegraph might preempt attack, that Harmon would hesitate to commit to such drastic action if federal intervention seemed imminent. Instead, the judge had accelerated his timetable, perhaps guessing Luke's intentions. Dawn found him already in motion, alternately riding and walking, to spare his exhausted mount. The horse could manage perhaps another 10 miles before complete collapse, hopefully enough to reach Benton Springs, now less than 8 miles distant, according to the trapper's map. The forest thinned as Luke descended toward the settlement, forcing greater caution. Mills and his men had presumably continued to Benton Springs overnight, likely establishing surveillance around the telegraph office in anticipation of Luke's arrival. By mid-morning, Luke caught his first glimpse of Benton Springs, a small settlement nestled in protected valley, perhaps 30 buildings clustered around a central street. Significantly, several horses stood hitched outside the largest structure, which bore a sign identifying it as Combined General Store and Telegraph Office. Even from this distance, Luke recognized Mills' distinctive gray gelding among them. The sheriff and at least some of his posse had indeed reached Benton Springs first, exactly as feared. Luke retreated into forest cover, considering increasingly limited options. Attempting to reach the telegraph office directly meant near certain capture. Waiting for nightfall might improve his chances, but cost precious hours while Jackson's people faced artillery bombardment. A third option presented itself as Luke studied the settlement layout. The telegraph line itself ran along rudimentary poles connecting Benton Springs to larger communities east and west. If he couldn't reach the telegraph office, perhaps he could access the line directly. Luke remembered basic telegraph operation from the war messages traveled as electrical impulses along the wire. Interrupting that flow created detectable signal disruption. Operators used specific patterns of interruption Morse code to transmit information. He couldn't send a coherent message by simply tampering with the line, but he could create disruption noticeable enough to prompt investigation from Helena. If the line suddenly failed completely, repair crews would be dispatched. Luke located a section of telegraph wire crossing relatively accessible terrain half-mile west of settlement. His gelding, sensing journey's end, summoned final reserves of energy to carry him within 100 yards of the target. The simplest approach would be cutting the wire entirely, but this would merely register as line damage, potentially taking days to repair. Luke needed something more distinctive, a pattern of interruption that might alert operators to deliberate tampering. He fashioned a makeshift clamp from belt leather, allowing him to connect and disconnect the wire repeatedly. Not elegant, but potentially effective. Approaching the telegraph pole required crossing exposed ground, unavoidable risk given his objective. Luke left his exhausted horse in forest cover, then advanced cautiously toward the nearest pole documents secured inside his coat. He reached the pole without incident, quickly shinning up to access the wire. The makeshift clamp allowed him to break and reconnect the circuit repeatedly. Not proper Morse code, but distinctive pattern no natural damage would create. After several minutes of this crude signaling, Luke attached Mary's journal, Lang's test results, and Clara's sworn statement to the wire using strips torn from his shirt. The papers flapped conspicuously in the breeze, impossible to miss during line inspection. It wasn't ideal, but might bring territorial authorities to Benton Springs sooner than otherwise. Might prompt questions Harmon couldn't easily dismiss. As Luke descended, movement caught his peripheral vision, riders approaching from the settlement, still distant but moving purposefully in his direction. Someone had spotted his tampering. Luke sprinted for forest cover, reaching his horse, as riders appeared on the ridge behind him. Shouts confirmed discovery. They'd seen him at the telegraph pole and recognized the significance immediately. No time remained for subtlety. Luke mounted his nearly spent horse, urging the animal toward deeper forest as rifles cracked behind him. Bullets splintered tree trunks uncomfortably close to his position. The gelding gave everything remaining, crashing through underbrush with desperate energy. But the animal's reserves were finite. Within half-mile, its stride faltered. Breathing became dangerously labored. Luke dismounted immediately, slapping the horse's flank to send it continuing, empty-saddled through the forest, a final diversion, while he proceeded on foot in different direction. The ruse bought precious minutes as pursuers followed the more visible horse tracks. Luke used the advantage to create distance, pushing northward through increasingly rugged terrain, while Mills's men continued east. By mid-afternoon, he'd evaded immediate pursuit but faced new crisis. On foot in deteriorating weather with minimal supplies, his situation had become critical. Benton Springs was now inaccessible. Thieves Valley lay nearly 30 miles west, impossibly distant without horse. And somewhere between Harmon's artillery continued bombarding a settlement of innocent families. Luke found temporary shelter beneath rocky overhang as afternoon snow squalls reduced visibility. The previous night's cold had been challenging on horseback with proper equipment. Tonight on foot with soaked clothing, hypothermia became genuine threat. As daylight faded, Luke faced stark reality. He had failed. His evidence remained attached to telegraph wire possibly already discovered and destroyed by Mills's men. His ability to warn or assist Jackson's people had evaporated with his horse's endurance. His own survival through another freezing night seemed increasingly doubtful. The knowledge settled like physical weight. Not just personal failure, but failure to protect those who depended on him. Hope Clara Jackson's community, all now subject to Harmon's unchecked vengeance. As darkness enveloped the landscape, Luke huddled deeper into inadequate shelter, using body position to conserve diminishing warmth. If he survived until morning, increasingly uncertain prospect, his only option became attempting to return to Thieves Valley on foot, a journey of several days under ideal conditions, potentially impossible, given weather and pursuit. Yet surrender remained unthinkable. Better to die trying than abandon those he'd come to love. Sleep came in dangerous fragments, each awakening more difficult as a cold seeped deeper into his core. During one such period of semi-consciousness, Luke became aware of approaching light, bobbing lantern moving through darkness toward his position. Mill's men tracking him despite darkness and weather. Luke reached for the deputy's revolver, checking remaining ammunition. 3 rounds insufficient against multiple pursuers, but enough to prevent capture. He would not return to Harmon's jail, would not provide the judge with satisfaction of public execution. The light grew closer, accompanied now by soft voice calling repeatedly, "Captain Mallory, Captain, you out there?" Luke froze, recognition dawning. Not Mill's voice, but familiar nonetheless. "Captain, it's Parker! Deputy Parker, I'm alone!" The deputy from the ranch, the man Luke had tied up, but who had provided valuable intelligence about routes to Thieves Valley. The officer who had seemed different from Harmon's other followers. Luke remained silent, weapon ready. Potential trap required caution. Parker's lantern illuminated the forest edge 30 yards distant. The deputy stood alone, as claimed rifle shouldered, rather than ready posture, deliberately non-threatening. "I know you're nearby, Captain," Parker called softly. "Tracked you from the telegraph line. But I'm not here to arrest you." Still, Luke waited, suspicion overriding curiosity. "I found your evidence," Parker continued. "Read enough to understand what Harmon's done, what he's still doing." This finally prompted response. "And," Luke called, position still concealed. Parker turned toward his voice. "And I sent it. Used the telegraph before Mills realized what was happening." Luke remained hidden, hope warring with disbelief. "Why would you do that?" "Because 20 years wearing this badge meant something once." Parker's voice carried genuine regret. "For Harmon corrupted everything it stood for." "Mills will hang you for betrayal." "Probably," Parker acknowledged matter-of-factly, "if he catches me, which is why I'm heading for Helena myself to testify personally about what I've witnessed." Luke finally emerged partially from concealment, revolver still ready. "What about Thieves Valley, the artillery attack?" "Began at dawn, 2 rounds fired when I left." Parker's expression darkened. "Governor's been notified, federal marshals dispatched from Helena, but they won't arrive for days." "Then Jackson's people have no chance." "That depends." Parker reached inside his coat, withdrawing folded paper. "Territorial judge in Helena issued this after receiving your evidence. Emergency injunction against Harmon, ordering immediate cessation of all actions against Thieves Valley settlement." Luke finally lowered his weapon, approaching cautiously to examine the document, official territorial court order, with appropriate seals and signatures. "This is legitimate," Parker nodded. "Delivered by telegraph 20 minutes after I transmitted your evidence. Mills doesn't know yet I intercepted before he could prevent transmission." "Harmon will ignore it," Luke predicted grimly. "Probably," Parker agreed, "unless someone delivers it directly to his artillery position, with sufficient witnesses to make suppression impossible." The implication clarified. "You're suggesting we try to reach Harmon with this order now." "Governor's authorized militia deployment if Harmon defies judicial command. This order makes his actions officially illegal, not just morally reprehensible." Parker's gaze held steady. "It might save lives, both at the settlement and among Harmon's own men, many of whom believe they're enforcing legitimate law." Luke considered the deputy's unexpected alliance with cautious optimism. "Even if I believed you, we'd never reach Harmon's position in time. Not on foot in these conditions." Parker smiled thinly. "Who said anything about walking?" He gestured beyond the trees where two horses stood tethered strong mountain ponies equipped for winter travel. Mills thinks I'm tracking you alone, Parker explained. Doesn't know I've read the evidence or transmitted it. Believes I'm still loyal to Harmon. And you're not? I follow the law, Captain Mallory. The real law, not Harmon's corruption of it. Parker extended the court order. Now, are we going to try saving those people or continue this philosophical discussion while they're being shelled? The choice crystallized with stark clarity. Trust this man potential trap or remain hiding while artillery destroyed Jackson's settlement, while Hope and Clara faced Harmon's vengeance. No choice at all, really. Lead on, deputy. Luke decided, accepting both the document and implicit alliance. We've got a long ride ahead. Clara Bellwright had witnessed war's aftermath as a journalist shattered cities grieving families, the hollow expressions of men who'd seen too much death. But nothing had prepared her for experiencing bombardment firsthand. The first artillery shell struck Thieves Valley shortly after dawn, a thunderous explosion that showered Central Gathering area with deadly fragments and debris. The second followed minutes later, destroying a storage building near the settlement's eastern edge. Jackson's defensive preparations had proven prescient. Most women and children were already sheltered in reinforced root cellars and dugouts when the shelling began. Fighting-age men occupied predetermined positions, though their rifles offered little defense against artillery deployed beyond effective range. Clara huddled in a central dugout with Hope and several other mothers with infants. The earthen shelter provided protection from shrapnel, but shook violently with each impact, dust raining from rough-hewn ceiling beams. How long can they keep firing? A young woman asked, clutching twin toddlers against her chest. Artillery requires significant ammunition, Clara answered, drawing on knowledge gained through her journalistic background. They likely brought limited shells, perhaps 20 or 30. Each weighs nearly 10 pounds. And after they run out, another mother questioned fearfully. Clara met her gaze directly. Then they'll advance with infantry, try to breach the defenses directly. The brutal arithmetic was inescapable. Jackson commanded perhaps 40 combat-capable defenders against Harmon's larger force equipped with superior weapons. Without external intervention, the settlement would eventually fall. Hope squirmed against Clara's chest, remarkably calm despite the periodic explosions. The infant seemed to draw strength from her namesake, facing chaos with peculiar serenity. "Your papa's coming back," Clara whispered against the baby's downy head. "He'll find a way." Whether Luke had successfully reached Benton Springs remained unknown. No messengers had arrived, no signal indicated successful communication with territorial authorities. Clara clung to faith in Luke's determination, but reality suggested his mission faced impossible odds. Above ground, artillery continued methodical destruction, one shell approximately every 30 minutes, systematically targeting settlement structures. Jackson's defenders maintained disciplined fire silence, conserving ammunition for inevitable ground assault. By mid-afternoon, the bombardment pattern changed, shells now concentrated on defensive positions rather than buildings. Harmon's forces were preparing for advanced, softening resistance before committing men to direct attack. Clara joined Jackson in the command dugout during brief lull between explosions. The former sergeant studied crude map of settlement approaches, face impassive despite increasingly desperate situation. "How much longer?" Clara asked quietly. "They fired 12 shells," Jackson calculated. "Probably have similar number remaining. At current rate, they'll initiate ground assault before dusk." "Can you stop them, Masaim?" Jackson's expression remained professional, but his eyes betrayed grim assessment. "We'll make them pay dearly for every shard, but eventually numbers and artillery will prevail. The women and children. Escape route prepared through Western Ravine. Difficult terrain, but navigable with guide. If settlement falls, non-combatants evacuate while we cover retreat." The cold tactical discussion belied emotional weight behind each decision. These people had built something precious. A community where former slaves lived as equals, where children grew up without constant fear, where dignity replaced degradation. Now it faced destruction from men who viewed their very existence as a affront to proper order. "Any word from Luke?" Jackson asked momentarily, allowing concern to surface. Clara shook her head. "Nothing, but he would have reached Benton Springs by now if—" She couldn't complete the sentence. If he survived, if he wasn't captured, if Harmon's men hadn't intercepted him. Too many ifs. "He's a good man," Jackson said simply. "One of the few white officers who saw us as soldiers, first colored men second. If anyone could complete that journey, it's him." The conversation ended abruptly as another shell screamed overhead, detonating against northern barricade with bone-jarring concussion. Clara returned to the women's shelter, hope diminishing with each passing hour. As afternoon waned toward evening, Jackson himself appeared at the dugout entrance, expression urgent. "Movement on eastern approach," he reported tensely. "Harmon's infantry advancing under covering fire. Maybe 30 men." "It's starting then," Clara confirmed grimly, securing Hope more firmly in her carrying sling. Jackson nodded. "Women and children move to evacuation position now. Davis will guide you through Western Ravine once engagement begins." Clara hesitated, maternal instinct warring with journalistic responsibility. "I should document this. What's happening here the world needs to know." "The world will only know if someone survives to tell them," Jackson countered pragmatically. "That baby needs you more than history does." The logic was irrefutable. Clara gathered essential supplies while other women did same food, water, minimal clothing for mountain travel. Hope remained remarkably calm throughout preparations, as if understanding necessity for silence. As they prepared to move toward the evacuation point, a new sound penetrated the dugout. Not artillery's concussive boom, but sustained rifle fire more intense than previous exchanges. The settlement's defenders engaging Harmon's advancing infantry. The battle for Thieves Valley had begun in earnest. Clara followed other women through connecting trenches toward western perimeter, Hope secured against her chest. Around them, Jackson's men maintained disciplined, defense-controlled rifle fire interspersed with tactical repositioning. From limited vantage points, Clara glimpsed attacking forces, uniformed deputies intermingled with civilian clothes advancing in irregular waves behind makeshift shields. Not professional military formation, but dangerous nonetheless through superior numbers and determination. The settlement's first defensive line appeared to be holding attackers pinned down 50 yards from outer barricades. But artillery continued supporting advanced shells, now walking dangerously close to defender positions. Clara reached evacuation assembly, point a reinforced dugout near hidden ravine entrance. 20 women and 30-some children waited tensely, belongings bundled for hasty departure. Davis, their designated guide, monitored battle progress through narrow observation slit. "How long?" Clara asked, joining him at the opening. "Jackson says wait for full darkness." Davis replied, voice tight with controlled tension. "Better coverage for evacuation. Maybe an hour." "Will the defenses hold that long?" Davis hesitated. "First line, yes, maybe second, third is questionable without reinforcement." The unspoken reality hung between them. Reinforcement would not come. Not in time. Perhaps not at all. Clara settled among other women, mechanically checking Hope's wrappings while straining to interpret battle sounds outside. The firing patterns told story. Experienced journalists could read defender positions gradually compressed, attacking forces gaining ground through attrition and artillery support. Jackson's people fought magnificently, extracting heavy toll for every yard surrendered. But without relief, without intervention, mathematics of combat remained brutally implacable. As daylight faded toward dusk, Davis signaled readiness. Prepare to move. Single file, absolute silence. Children carried if possible. The evacuation group assembled according to practice procedure, smallest children and infants first with mothers, older youths interspersed for assistance, elderly supported by stronger adults. Clara positioned herself mid-column, Hope secure in her sling beneath outer garments. Davis checked battle progress once more before nodding grimly. "It's time. May God go with us." The ravine entrance revealed itself as cleverly disguised opening in seemingly solid rock face, narrow passage barely wide enough for single person. Beyond stretched darkness, the path illuminated only by Davis's hooded lantern. Clara hesitated at threshold, glancing back towards settlement proper. Somewhere in that chaos of gunfire and explosions, men were dying to buy their families this chance at escape. Men like those who had fought beside Luke during the war, who had built something worth defending in this harsh wilderness. Men who deserved better than unmarked graves and forgotten sacrifice. "I'll tell your story," she whispered promise to those unseen defenders. "Whatever happens, the world will know what happened here." Then she ducked into narrow passage, following bobbing lantern ahead as evacuation columns snaked into Montana darkness. Behind them, artillery fire intensified, Harmon committing remaining shells to final assault as night descended. The ravine path proved treacherous, steep in sections, ice slick in others barely distinguishable in limited light. Women helped each other navigate difficult passages, experienced mountain dwellers assisting those less sure-footed. Children maintained remarkable silence, seeming to understand instinctively that sound meant danger. They had covered perhaps half-mile when Clara detected new noises echoing through ravine, horses approaching, multiple riders moving rapidly from western direction. Not settlement defenders who remained engaged in battle, not evacuees who traveled on foot, unknown riders intercepting their escape route. Davis extinguished lantern, immediately gesturing evacuation column into concealment against ravine walls. Clara pressed into shallow rock alcove, one hand covering Hope's mouth, should the infant choose this moment to cry. Hoofbeats grew louder, echoing strangely in confined space. Riders moving confidently, despite darkness, as if familiar with route. Their number impossible to determine from sound alone, perhaps 4 or 5, maybe more. Then voices carried clearly through still air, male authoritative coming from lead rider just ahead of their position. "Hold here, movement ahead." Clara's heart nearly stopped. She knew that voice. Impossible as it seemed impossible, as it was she knew. Luke. Before Davis could prevent her, Clara stepped from concealment, heedless of potential danger. "Luke," she called, voice breaking with desperate hope. "Luke Mallory." Silence followed her cry, tense and evaluating. Then cascade of movement, horses, advancing lanterns, uncovered riders materializing from darkness. And there in the lead sat Luke himself, exhausted, filthy, battered by elements, but gloriously, impossibly alive. "Clara," he called, disbelief matching her own. "What are you foul?" Evacuation, she managed emotions threatening to overwhelm coherent speech. "Settlement under attack. Women and children escaping west while men defend." Luke dismounted instantly, crossing to her with urgent purpose. His arms encircled both Clara and Hope, brief, fierce embrace, communicating everything words couldn't capture: relief, love, gratitude for their safety. Then professional focus reasserted itself as he addressed Davis. "The battle current status." "Bad," the guide reported succinctly. "Last defensive line when we left. Artillery throughout day, infantry assault at dusk." Luke nodded grimly before turning to his companions, Deputy Parker and 3 other men Clara didn't recognize. "Parker, escort these people to safety. Continue west until you reach Trapper's Junction." He removed territorial court order from inside coat. "Thompson, you're with me. We need to reach Harmon with this immediately." "You're going back." Clara grabbed his arm, panic rising. "They'll kill you." "This order makes Harmon's attack illegal under territorial law," Luke explained, touching the document. "Federal marshals are already en route from Helena. If we can deliver this to the battlefield, force Harmon to acknowledge official intervention." "He'll ignore it," Clara protested. "He's gone too far to stop now." "Maybe," Luke conceded, "but his men might not, especially once they understand they're committing illegal acts that will bring federal prosecution." The logic was sound but insufficient against Clara's visceral fear. "You just found us," she whispered, voice breaking. "Don't leave again." Luke cupped her face gently, thumb brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "I have to try. For Jackson. For all of them." Between them, Hope stirred tiny hand emerging from blankets to grasp Luke's finger with surprising strength. He smiled down at his daughter, emotion briefly overwhelming military discipline. "Take care of her," he told Clara softly. "Whatever happens, she has you now." Then he was mounting again, Parker transferring to evacuation duty, while Luke and Thompson prepared to ride toward battle. No grand farewells, no dramatic declarations, just simple acknowledgement of duty that couldn't be avoided. Clara watched him disappear into darkness. Hope clutched against her heart like talisman against loss. The evacuation column resumed movement westward now, with Parker's mounted protection safer but somehow emptier for Luke's departure. Behind them, gunfire continued, unabated, punctuated by periodic artillery blasts. The battle for Thieves Valley entered its final phase, outcome balanced on knife's edge of chance and courage. And somewhere between, Luke rode directly into danger, carrying fragile hope that law might yet prevail where justice had failed. Harmon watched with clinical detachment as his forces advanced through twilight towards settlement's final defensive line. The operation progressed acceptably, if slower than anticipated. Jackson's people fought with surprising discipline, extracting significant casualties during each phase of assault. But artillery made outcome inevitable. The howitzer had systematically reduced defensive positions throughout day, creating breaches infantry now exploited. By morning, resistance would collapse entirely. Sir Sheriff Mills approached expression, troubled beneath blood-stained bandage. Eastern flank reports women and children evacuating through Western Ravine. Unacceptable, Harmon snapped. Send Johnson's group to intercept. Johnson's men are engaged in main assault, Mills reminded cautiously. Diverting them would weaken our advance. Then send reserves. We have no reserves, sir. Every available man is committed to frontline action. Harmon's frustration mounted. The operation had proven more costly than projected, nearly dozen men wounded or killed, already ammunition depleted faster than anticipated. Jackson's veterans fought like the trained soldiers. They were not like civilians facing overwhelming force. What about Mallory? Harmon demanded, changing subject abruptly. Any sign? Mills shook his head. Parker tracked him to telegraph line outside Benton Springs but lost trail afterward. Believed heading back this direction on foot after losing his horse. Incompetence, Harmon muttered. One man eluding entire search party. Parker's continuing a pursuit, Mills offered placatingly. Says Mallory can't have gone far without mount. Harmon dismissed this with irritated gesture. Mallory's individual fate had become secondary to larger operation. With settlements' destruction and resident elimination, evidence of earlier crimes became irrelevant. Tragic accident, regrettable misunderstanding, necessary law enforcement against armed resistors. History was written by survivors after all. Prepare final assault, Harmon ordered crisply. Commit remaining artillery to breach central barricade. All infantry advance immediately afterward. Mills hesitated. Sir, our men are exhausted, fighting since dusk against determined resistance. Perhaps morning assault would... Now, Sheriff, Harmon's voice dropped dangerously. Or find replacement, willing to follow orders. Mills retreated, visibly troubled, but obedient. Moments later, howitzer roared again, 13th shell of operation expertly placed against settlement's central defensive position. As darkness settled fully across battlefield, Harmon observed his forces consolidating for final push. Lanterns illuminated grim faces of deputies and hired guns. Alike men who had expected routine law enforcement action, discovering instead the brutal reality of combat against trained veterans. Harmon remained unmoved by their suffering. Means justified, ends always had throughout his career. The railroad required land. Prosperity required sacrifice. Order required occasional bloodshed. Simple equations that had served him well. From forward position, bugle calls signaled imminent infantry advance. Harmon nodded approval despite anachronistic military flourish. Mills had been cavalry during war. Old habits apparently died hard. Before assault commenced, unexpected commotion erupted. Behind command position, horses approaching at dangerous speed. Through darkness, riders calling urgently for attention. Harmon turned irritably toward interruption. What now? Two riders materialized from night one, immediately recognizable despite trail grime and exhaustion. Luke Mallory. Harmon's hand moved instinctively toward holstered revolver shock, momentarily overwhelming tactical assessment. How had Mallory reached battlefield? Who accompanied him? Why approach command position directly rather than joining settlement defenders? Before Harmon could formulate challenge, Mallory raised document clearly visible, even in limited light, official-looking paper bearing unmistakable territorial court seal. Judge Samuel Harmon, Mallory called, voice carrying across suddenly silent command area. By order of Territorial Circuit Court, you are commanded to cease all actions against Thieves Valley Settlement immediately. The pronouncement hung in still air, operations momentarily suspended as implications registered. Men paused mid-preparation, attention diverted toward unexpected confrontation. Harmon recovered quickly, practiced authority reasserting itself. Arrest that man. He's escaped murderer under territorial warrant. But deputies hesitated, uncertainty evident in their expressions. Mallory's companion, railroad executive Thompson Harmon, now recognized with dawning horror, spoke with clear projection. The order is legitimate, delivered by telegraph to Benton Springs following evidence transmission to Helena. Federal marshals are already dispatched to investigate charges against Judge Harmon, including murder, poisoning, land fraud, and illegal military action against civilian settlement. Murmurs spread through assembled men. Confusion, concern dawning. comprehension that their actions might carry personal consequences beyond Harmon's protection. Lies, Harmon declared forcefully. Desperate fabrications by murderer seeking escape from justice. The evidence is extensive, Thompson continued relentlessly. Mary Mallory's journal documenting poisoning symptoms, Dr. Lang's scientific confirmation of arsenic in water supply, witness statements regarding Jeremy Harmon's actual fate, financial records showing railroad payments to judicial accounts. Each revelation struck with precision, undermining Harmon's carefully constructed authority. Around him, deputies exchanged troubled glances, some lowering weapons previously directed towards settlement. "Enough," Harmon shouted, drawing his revolver. "Mallory murdered my son. These accusations are desperate distractions." "Your son died years after Antietam," Luke responded calmly, unmoved by weapon now aimed directly at him. "Died after killing your second wife. You covered up both crimes, then used his remains to frame me when I refused to sell land Northern Pacific wanted." The accusations, so specific, so detailed, silenced even Harmon momentarily. How could Mallory know these things, who had betrayed confidences so carefully guarded? In silence that followed, Mills stepped forward, expression resolute. "Judge Harmon, I must ask if these allegations have merit." "You dare question me?" Harmon snarled, a revolver shifting towards Sheriff. "After everything I've done for you?" "I'm asking officially," Mills clarified, badge suddenly prominent on bloodstained coat, "as duly appointed sheriff with responsibility to uphold territorial law." Something fractured in Harmon's carefully maintained facade, composure cracking beneath accumulated pressure of exposure, resistance, and betrayal. His hand trembled slightly, revolver wavering between multiple targets. "The law is what I say it is," he declared, voice rising dangerously. "This territory exists by my administration. These developments proceed by my authority. These lands transfer according to my rulings." The megalomaniacal declaration completed transformation that had been occurring gradually throughout day-respected jurist, to military commander, to naked tyrant power, no longer concealed beneath legal pretense. Deputies recognized the transition immediately, several backing away from commander, whose sanity they now openly questioned. Others looked to Mills for direction, professional loyalty transferring naturally to recognized law enforcement hierarchy. "Stand down, Judge Harmon," Mills ordered quietly but firmly. "Surrender your weapon and submit to questioning regarding these allegations." For a suspended moment, violence balanced on knife-edge Harmon's finger, tightening on trigger, deputies uncertain whether to intervene, Mallory and Thompson vulnerable before unstable judiciary. Then reality reasserted itself in Harmon's expression, calculation replacing mania, self-preservation overriding revenge. The judge lowered his weapon slowly, aristocratic demeanor reconstructing itself with visible effort. "Of course, Sheriff," he agreed smoothly. "Simple misunderstanding, easily clarified through proper procedures. I welcome official investigation into these preposterous accusations." Mills approached cautiously, extending hand for surrendered revolver. "Order ceasefire immediately, Judge. All operations suspended pending investigation." Harmon complied with theatrical cooperation, signaling aides to transmit ceasefire orders to forward positions. Within minutes, bugle calls echoed across battlefield, stand-down commands recognizable to veterans on both sides. The abrupt silence after hours of combat seemed almost surreal, broken only by occasional groan of wounded or crackle of abandoned fires. Men who moments earlier had been trying desperately to kill each other now stood uncertainly in darkness, awaiting instructions that acknowledged new reality. Luke dismounted carefully, watching Harmon with unwavering attention despite exhaustion evident in every movement. The judge's sudden compliance triggered soldiers' instinctive suspicion, enemy changing tactics rather than surrendering advantage. "Sheriff Mills," Luke called, maintaining distance from Harmon, "I suggest immediate segregation of prisoners and dispatch of messengers to settlement informing defenders of ceasefire." Mills nodded agreement, directing deputies to secure Harmon while organizing communication with Jackson's forces. The battlefield transformed rapidly from combat zone to administrative challenge, wounded requiring attention, chains of command requiring clarification, accusations requiring documentation. Throughout transition, Luke remained focused on Harmon, watching for indication that apparent capitulation masked continued threat. The judge maintained perfect composure, cooperating fully with preliminary questioning, while subtly reminding deputies of past favors and shared interests. A performance Luke recognized, calculated demonstration of reasonable authority temporarily inconvenienced by procedural misunderstanding. Harmon wasn't defeated, merely regrouping. Thompson approached, voice low enough for private conversation. Federal marshals won't arrive until tomorrow at earliest. Can Mills control him until then? Uncertain, Luke admitted. Harmon still commands loyalty from some deputies. Others fear implication in his crimes. Then we maintain vigilance, Thompson decided grimly, and pray the settlement agrees to cease fire without further bloodshed. As if answering prayer riders approached from settlement direction, Jackson himself, accompanied by 2 lieutenants, proceeding under white flag improvised from torn shirt. Their appearance, while cautious, suggested willingness to acknowledge battlefield developments. Luke moved to meet them, relief evident in his expression as Jackson dismounted stiffly, blood-staining left sleeve but determination undiminished. Heard bugle call, the former sergeant reported tersely. Ceasefire legitimate. Territorial court order, Luke confirmed, passing document for inspection. Harmon temporarily neutralized pending federal investigation. Mills currently maintaining control of deputies. Jackson studied court order with professional thoroughness before nodding acceptance. Convenient timing, Captain. Another hour and settlement defenses would have collapsed completely. Women and children. Evacuating westward under Davis and Parker's protection, Luke assured him, Clara and Hope among them. I encountered evacuation column in Western Ravine before returning here. Something eased in Jackson's posture, not relaxation exactly, but moderation of combat-ready tension maintained throughout prolonged defense. Casualties? Luke asked quietly. 8 dead, 15 wounded, several critically. Jackson's expression remained stoic, despite personal costs those numbers represented. Enemy losses approximately double based on observation. The brutal arithmetic of combat lives reduced to numerical assessment victory, measured in relative mortality. Luke had commanded men during war, had written such reports himself. The necessity never diminished fundamental obscenity of calculation. What happens now? Jackson inquired, practically gaze shifting toward improvised prisoner area, where Harmon sat conversing with increasingly uncomfortable-looking deputy. Federal marshals arrive tomorrow, Luke explained. Formal charges filed against Harmon and accomplices. Witness statements collected from settlement residents and artillery victims. And afterward, when legal machinery concludes. Jackson's question addressed deeper concern whether temporary intervention would produce lasting justice or merely short reprieve before oppression resumed under different authority. I don't know, Luke admitted honestly, but evidence against Harmon appears substantial. Multiple capital crimes documented through independent sources, Northern Pacific officially distancing itself from operations. He glanced toward Thompson, who nodded confirmation. Perhaps justice prevails occasionally, Jackson mused without particular conviction, though history suggests otherwise for people like mine. The observation contained no self-pity, merely realistic assessment from man whose life had taught hard lessons about American justice. Luke couldn't offer platitudes against such earned skepticism. One battle at time, Sergeant, he said instead. Tonight your people survive. Tomorrow we pursue formal justice through available channels. Beyond that lies Montana Spring. Jackson completed unexpectedly, gesture encompassing surrounding landscape, winterlocked now, but inevitably transitioning toward renewal. And whatever it brings. The simple statement somehow encapsulated everything: hope without naivete, determination without delusion, continuation without guarantee. The perspective of men who had survived slavery, war, discrimination, and attempted extermination, yet continued building something worth defending. I should return to settlement, Jackson decided practically. Wounded need attention. Defenses require maintenance despite ceasefire. I'll accompany you to, Luke offered. Help organize witness statements for federal marshals. Then continue westward toward evacuation group. Toward Clara and Hope, unspoken but understood between them. As they prepared to depart, commotion erupted near prisoners' area, shouting sudden movement, deputies rushing toward apparent disturbance. Luke and Jackson exchanged alarmed glances before spurring mounts toward disruption. They arrived to find Mills kneeling beside fallen deputy, blood pooling beneath young man's body. Nearby, another officer struggled to restrain Harmon, who had somehow obtained small derringer despite initial disarmament. "He's dead," Mills announced grimly, closing unseeing eyes of deputy who had apparently been guarding prisoner. "Shot point blank while checking restraints." Harmon ceased struggling, demeanor shifting from desperate resistance to judicial dignity with unsettling ease. "Unfortunate accident during legitimate self-defense," he declared smoothly. Young man became agitated, threatened immediate execution without trial. "I merely protected myself using weapon prudently concealed for emergencies." The calculated explanation, simultaneously confession and justification, demonstrated Harmon's continued manipulation even in custody, creating narrative that acknowledged undeniable facts while reconstructing context to support preferred interpretation, technique that had served him throughout career. Mills's expression hardened as he rose, blood-staining hands and knees. "Samuel Harmon, you are charged with murder of Deputy Michael Collins, committed in presence of multiple witnesses. Additional charges pending federal investigation." Formality complete, sheriff's professional demeanor cracked slightly, voice dropping to dangerous register. "Get him secured, proper restraints, constant observation. No one approaches without my direct authorization." As Harmon was led away, maintaining remarkable composure despite circumstances, Luke felt familiar combat aftermath, sensation mixture of relief, exhaustion, and lingering hypervigilance that accompanied transition from survival to assessment. One threat neutralized, but consequences remained unresolved. Justice initiated, but incomplete. Safety established, but temporary. Jackson articulated unspoken concern. He'll have allies, connections beyond local influence. Men like him rarely face consequences commensurate with their crimes. "Perhaps," Luke acknowledged, "but tonight he sits in custody while your people sleep in safety. Sometimes that's victory enough." They rode together towards settlement battlefield, gradually receding behind them. Ahead, lanterns glowed from Thieves Valley structures that had survived artillery bombardment, damaged but standing like community they sheltered. Tomorrow would bring federal marshals, formal investigations, legal proceedings extending months or years. Would bring reunions with evacuated families, assessment of losses, decisions about rebuilding or relocating. Would bring Luke to Clara and Hope, completing circle broken by Harmon's machinations and Montana's winter fury. But tonight brought simple certainty of survival, of justice initiated, if not completed, of evil confronted, if not eliminated, of future possible, if not guaranteed. As they crested final ridge overlooking settlement, Luke paused momentarily, gaze drawn westward toward distant mountains, where evacuation group traveled, where Clara protected his daughter with fierce determination he'd come to admire beyond simple gratitude. "Go," Jackson said simply, recognizing unspoken priority. "We'll manage here until you return." Luke hesitated, soldier's instinct for completing mission, warring with father's desperate need to confirm families' safety. "The wounded will receive proper care," Jackson assured him. "Federal marshals will find me when needed." Luke completed, decision crystallizing. "I'll return by morning with the evacuation group." Jackson nodded approval. "Family first, Captain." "Always." Simple wisdom from man who had preserved his own community against impossible odds. Luke accepted guidance with grateful nod before turning westward, urging tired mount toward deeper connection than duty or justice. Toward hope. Toward Clara. Toward whatever future Montana's approaching spring might bring. Behind him, Thieves Valley glowed with renewed determination, battered but standing, diminished but unbowed. Before him stretched wilderness, gradually transitioning from winter's grip toward inevitable renewal. And somewhere between past and future, between justice and grace, between loss and discovery, Luke Mallory rode toward home he hadn't known existed until danger revealed its precious contours. The final blizzard had passed. Spring awakened across Montana territory, and with it, hope endured. The end.